Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D in WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of WhatIf Deku in Class 1A encountered the Port Mafia's Double Black. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It was a relatively normal day for Midoriya considering all the shit Class 1A had been through. And that's excluding all the villain attacks that happened. He, Ida, and Uraraka were walking towards the gym room, chatting about the usual things like heroes and homework. Ida had requested for his help to move some things as per Aizawa-sensei's orders, and Uraraka had volunteered to help. But it seems that Midoriya spoke too soon. While heading towards their destination, a sudden bright light flashed behind them. Immediately, their senses went high on alert, wondering if this was yet another villain attack. They heard two thuds as the light faded, like the sound of bodies hitting the ground. And maybe because it was what they were taught to do or their heroic instincts, the three of them didn't hesitate to run forward to help. If Aizawa-sensei were here, he'd have threatened to expel them for rushing forward recklessly. But someone might be in danger, so to hell with expulsion. They were the closest to the scene. And if it really were a villain attack, they're the only ones who could stop them before someone else gets hurt. After regaining their eyesight from the blinding light, they found two bodies lying on the ground motionless. Midoriya feared the worst as he activated one for all even if it was against the rules. He shot forward, arriving at the two bodies in a split second. With trembling hands, he shook one of the bodies, praying that they were still alive. Not a drop of blood was seen, but with how diverse quirks are, it isn't a stretch to assume a quirk could stop someone's heart from beating without spilling blood. Only when Midoriya was searching for a pulse did he realize the peculiar getup of the unconscious boy he was holding on to. Almost every inch of his exposed skin was wrapped in bandages. Around his neck, his wrists, even his right eye. An ominous feeling made his hair stand on end. When Ida and Uraraka finally arrived, they inspected the other bodies still lying on the ground. It was at this moment when the bandaged boy in his hands cracked open his eyelids. Relief washed over Midoriya in waves, glad to see he was still breathing. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Before Midoriya could even finish voicing out his question, he felt someone grabbing his wrist, and in one swift motion, he found himself face planted on the ground. One moment, the bandaged boy was unconscious on the ground. The next, Midoriya was the one on the ground. The boy had a firm grip on his wrist, holding it at an angle that would dislocate his shoulders should the greenhead move rashly. His other hand was pinned down with a foot, a knee dug into his back, locking him down. All these happened in a moment and Midoriya couldn't even react. When Ida and Uraraka noticed, they ran forward to help. Well, they attempted to. Yet before they could even take a step forward, a red glow enveloped their bodies before they fell face first into the ground. "Ida-kun, Uraraka-san," he shouted. Midoriya could still move his legs and head, albeit uselessly, but both Ida and Uraraka couldn't even lift a finger. They tried, yet ultimately failing. Their bodies sinking deeper into the ground along with their anguished cries. What quirk is this?" Ida stammered out weakly. The invisible force crushing him made it hard for him to speak properly. When Midoriya tried to activate one for all again, he heard a click, then the nozzle of a pistol aimed at his skull. "You, who are you?" A voice so cold and detached drifted from the bandaged boy. "I am Midoriya Izuku. We're just trying to help. We found you lying on the ground uncon," he stammered out, trying his best to sound harmless. The boy was probably startled, so if he assured the boy that he's safe, he'd calm down. But it seems the bandaged boy had other plans. "I don't give a shit about your name. Who are you and where am I?" Perhaps it was because he'd been involved in too many dangerous situations. But Midoriya felt the murderous intent rolling off the brunette. It was so dense the young hero felt it difficult to breathe. "I am a hero student at the UA Hero School. We're in the UA school grounds currently." Midoriya had hoped that the mention of UA would cause the boy to back off considering how many pro-heroes were stationed here after all the villain attacks, but he should have learned from before to not hold on to hope so much. "UA? What kind of institute is that? Never heard of it. And what's with the hero storyline? Are you filming a movie or something? That can't be. Who in Japan would not know of UA Hero School? And who in the world would not know of heroes, the very pillar holding up society right now?" The boy spoke again before Midoriya could respond. This time, his question was directed at someone else. "Chuuya, is your brain still intact?" he called out, pistol still aimed at the greenhead's skull. "Oh right, you don't have one. Never mind then. Would it fucking kill you to be serious for once, you shithead?" The other boy, Chuuya, apparently, who still had both Ida and Uraraka pinned down, answered. "And here I thought you were actually concerned for my well-being." The two boys continued bickering back and forth. Midoriya strained to turn his head so he could get a good look at the second boy. A bed of red hair sat on his head, an old-fashioned hat over it. He was wearing a suit similar to the bandaged boy with a bolo tie instead, and a long black overcoat. His eyes were a bright cerulean blue instead of the dark amber eyes the brunette has, a stark contrast of the both. Was he a foreigner? But his name is Japanese, so maybe a mixed race then. Just when Midoriya was trying to form a plan to get out of this predicament and save both Ida and Uraraka from being crushed to death, numerous footsteps were heard, coming from the direction of UAS towers. He first spotted Aizawa-sensei at the front, running towards them at full speed, his eyes glowing with the activation of his quirk. Then following behind is All Might in his shriveled form and Nimiri-sensei. The sight of the pro-heroes put Midoriya's mind at ease, thinking that they were safe. The young hero would remind himself later to learn from his mistakes. That's enough. One more step closer and I'll put a bullet through his head. Dazai, Midoriya had picked up his name from their bicker earlier, said, pushing the pistol deeper into his skull and unlocking the safety. Dazai's voice wasn't loud, but it's clear that Aizawa-sensei heard him from where he halted in his steps. All Might and Nimiri-sensei stopped at his side too, obeying his command. Put the gun down and let my students go. Whatever it is, we can talk. Aizawa-sensei still has his quirk activated from the way his eyes were glowing and his hair floating. But it was practically useless when his assailant had a literal gun pointed at his head. Dazai seemed to notice this too. He took a second to think about it before saying, I think not. We can converse this way perfectly. When Aizawa-sensei was at a loss, thinking about his next course of action, a shot was fired. Midoriya went rigid, wondering if the bandaged boy had pulled the trigger and if he was the target. Yet he felt no pain and his vision was still clear. Did he hear wrong? Or was it Snipe that fired it? His answer came in the form of a stinging pain from his right ear, where he felt something moist sliding down to his neck. One more misstep and I won't be so merciful. That includes you too, Oba-san. Dazai had fired the shot, not at his head, but close enough. The bullet had grazed the skin of his ear and embedded itself into the ground. If Dazai had angled his gun just a few degrees left, Midoriya would be buried with a hole through his skull. Nimiri-sensei looked positively offended at being called an auntie, but her hands returned to her side where she was about to tear her skin-tight suit and release her sleep-inducing aroma. She was mostly hidden behind All Might and Aizawa-sensei, so Midoriya had no idea how Dazai found out. Young man, we're not trying to harm you. There's no need for vile. All Might tries to defuse the situation, holding his hands up in surrender, taking a small, slow step forward. But Dazai meant every word he said. He aimed his gun and fired, without hesitation. However, what should have been a loud bang from a gunshot was instead replaced by a soft click of an empty gun. That was my last bullet, Dazai drawled, swinging the pistol in his hands dramatically. Aizawa-sensei reacted immediately, pouncing forward while unwrapping his scarf. Before he could even get close, an object enveloped in a red glow came hurtling at him at the speed of sound. Because of the imminent danger, he was forced to change directions midway, barely avoiding the object aimed at him. A small slit appeared on his cheek, oozing with blood. If Aizawa-sensei had been any less slow in noticing the danger, there would be a dagger impaled into his skull. Oi, the bandage freak said to not move, didn't he? Hope you didn't forget about me just cause I was quiet. Chuuya glared at Aizawa-sensei fiercely, his pupils narrowing to slits like a cat. At some point in time, he had made himself comfortable on Ida's back with one foot over Uraraka to keep her down. Chuuya, how could you call me that? I'm sensitive to cruel words, you know. Dazai whined, his tone high-pitched like a girl's. Quit whining and get down to business, you fucker. Find out what the fuck's going on so we can get the hell back. Chuuya snapped, throwing a pebble at Dazai's direction which was easily avoided by the latter. There's some kind of child experiment facility. Kid's got a jet engine on his calves. Chuuya taps on the exhaust pipes protruding from Ida's calves, a confused look on his face. Ugh, fine. Maybe if you grew some brains, I wouldn't have to do so much. But I guess life is never fair, huh? Dazai rolls his eyes, completely unaware of how the ginger was practically fuming from his ears. Meanwhile, Midoriya was busy trying to think of a way to escape with Ida and Uraraka. The fact that they had been subdued by the enemy was hindering the teachers from doing their jobs. If they weren't being held as hostages, Aizawa-sensei and the others wouldn't have to hold back. Reinforcements are coming. If you surrender now, we can still talk this out, Aizawa-sensei gritted out, his glowing eyes now trained on Chuuya. Yet, the red glow enveloping both Ida and Uraraka remained, not weakening in the slightest. This outcome baffled Midoriya, Aizawa-sensei even more so. The pro-hero's eyes widened. How? He muttered. Might I remind you that I have 3 of your students under my mercy? If anything, you're in no position to negotiate with me, Dazai said matter-of-factly. Midoriya couldn't help the tense feeling crawling up to him. The 3 of them were his biggest bargaining chips. If Midoriya could just escape with Ida and Uraraka, they'd lose their initiative and the heroes can act freely. Midoriya caught All Might's gaze, who gave him a slight nod, understanding what he was about to do. With his reassurance, and the fact he doesn't have a gun pointed at him anymore, Midoriya stopped holding back and activated One for All. One for All, full cal. 1 second. 2 seconds. Nothing happened. The power that had grown familiar with Midoriya for a long time showed no signs of responding no matter how much he called out to them. He tried reaching for it, yet it felt like his connection with his quirk had been completely cut off. Never had he thought that he'd feel so powerless again, like he was back when he was still the ordinary, quirkless boy. Was it Dazai's quirk? Does he have an erasure quirk similar to Aizawa-sensei's? No need to be so stiff. We just wanted to ask a few questions. Dazai waved the gun in his hands playfully. A bright smile that didn't quite reach his eyes plastered on his face. What questions? Aizawa-sensei asked skeptically. Realizing that his quirk doesn't affect the two boys, he wisely deactivated it to conserve his energy. It would be bad if he overworked himself before capturing the two intruders. Oh, just simple ones. Nothing you can't answer, he replied. Like where are we and what year is it? Wait, what year is it? Are you saying we teleported and time traveled? Chuuya caught on to Dazai's keywords and asked incredulously, his jaw hanging slack. Of course your pea-sized body comes equipped with a pea-sized brain, Dazai tutted. To which Chuuya flipped him off aggressively. Let me break it down in simple terms so you don't fry your brain. Chuuya looked like he wanted to throw it at him but thought otherwise. Since we're conversing in Japanese, I assume we're still in Japan. And since Yokohama is a port city yet there's no scent of salt basically means that we're in a different city but still in Japan. Then there's the weird hero shit they mentioned. Right now, in our time, abilities are a rarity and people would rather hide them so they don't stand out in society. Yet in this timeline, it's used as a profession. I don't think the boys' engine calves are an experiment, but rather an evolution of time, where abilities can now manifest itself physically. Though I guess they call it quirks considering how quirky they are. Pun intended. It was an amazing analysis with so minimal of evidence, Midoriya noted. And he was the one who was supposed to have the hero analysis book he recorded from his observations. Even though he was very much in a dangerous situation, Midoriya couldn't help but find Dazai's situation intriguing. Teleportation and time traveling. The closest he had ever been to a space or time ability was Kirigiri's warp quirk, and even that was limited to places the villain has been before. Ugh, fine, you can stop rubbing it in my face now, you arrogant bastard. But Chuuya, I was only trying to help. Dazai pouted. Yet it didn't stop the smug smile from forming on his face. Then he turned back to Aizawa-sensei. As I was saying, where are we and what year is it? We're in Musutafu, Japan, Aizawa-sensei answered, careful to keep his tone level and to reveal as little information as ever. Though it wasn't necessary because Midoriya already revealed they were in UA. He'll need to learn from that mistake too. The year is 2257. 200 years. Chuuya shrieked, startling everyone on scene. Chuuya, calm down. I can do basic maths. There's no need to yell, Dazai chided. Calm down. We're thrown 200 years into the future and you want me to calm down. He started scratching his head furiously, then proceeded to pull his hair. Dazai only covered his ears with a grimace as a response. Now, I assume you realize the predicament we're in courtesy of the loud, idiot slug back there. Just like how you want your students to be freed. We would very much like to go back to our world too, Dazai answered all sincerely. I'm sure as heroes, you people can't bear to watch two powerless teenagers wander around in a world that's not theirs, right? Midoriya balked at that statement. Both Dazai and Chuuya were anything but powerless teenagers. In fact, they're the ones holding all the cards here. The silence around them thickened, the tension so tangible one could cut it with a pair of scissors. Dazai only stared at Aizawa-sensei with a light smile on his lips, his gaze firm and unwavering as he continued his stare down with the pro-hero. Eventually, it was Aizawa-sensei who backed down first. Very well. I'll talk to the principal and we'll see what we can do, Aizawa-sensei sighed, rubbing his temples and letting go of his scarf. Now, will you please release the students? They don't have to be involved. Dazai tapped his lips, miming a thinking expression. That's when Midoriya heard the pattering sounds of multiple footsteps approaching this way. This was most likely the reinforcements Aizawa-sensei mentioned. Just when he thought freedom was in his grasp, Midoriya felt it being ruthlessly ripped away from him. With so many heroes arriving, there was no way Dazai would let go of his one and only bargaining chip. Now more than ever, he has to hold on to the three of them so the heroes won't arrest them. However, the opposite happened instead. Midoriya felt the weight on his body lifting and the grip around his wrist loosening. He could feel the familiar tickle of one for all returning back to him. Of course, since we have a deal, I won't need them anymore, Dazai said, raising his arms in surrender and even dropping his gun. Chuuya mirrored the brunette's actions, retracting his powers over Ida and Uraraka, coming over to stand beside Dazai. Such a development wasn't one that Midoriya expected, but he didn't have the time to think it over. After being freed, he rushed over to his two friends who struggled to get up from their positions on the ground. Are you guys all right? He asked worriedly, checking to see if they were hurt or anything. I'm fine, ugh. Uraraka held onto her ribs, folding over and groaning in pain. Chuuya's power had crushed her so hard one of her ribs probably broke. Midoriya, take both of them to Recovery Girl now. We'll take care of things here. Midoriya wanted to protest, but seeing how his friends were in pain, he obeyed his teacher's words, albeit somewhat reluctantly. Before he left while supporting both Ida and Uraraka, he dared a last look at the duo who appeared so suddenly to find Dazai staring at him with a mysterious smile on his face. The look he gave was chilling enough to send a shiver traveling up his spine. Now, shall we get our discussion going then? Was the last thing he heard before he sped off to the infirmary. So I heard of your situation from Aizawa-sensei. You're saying you traveled 200 years into the future? Nezu repeated. They were currently in the conference room with the principal seated at the head of the table while the two intruders from the past were seated at the opposite end. Most of the UA teachers who arrived at the end of his interaction with the two of them took up the seats at the side. Yes, that's what I presume to have happened from all the evidence I've gathered thus far. The boy, Dazai Osamu as he introduced earlier, replied truthfully. His companion, Nakahara Chuuya, was rather quiet by his side, though his glare was anything but. Aizawa swears those eyes could kill someone. Just how does a teenager have a gaze that intense? Time travel? Seriously? Quirks had only just manifested 200 years ago and you're saying something that powerful was what caused you to appear here? Azashi said skeptically, an incredulous look on his face. Aizawa, for the first time, thought his friend's reasoning was sound and nodded along beside him. Like you said, quirks only manifested 200 years ago. It may not be that powerful of an ability, but since it was a relatively foreign addition, there's a chance of it going out of control and causing this to happen, Dazai reasoned. Aizawa never liked the boy from the very start when he threatened his students, but he had to admit the boy was smart. Plus, it may not even be because of someone from my timeline, but rather yours. Oh, what do you mean by that? Nezu asked, his eyes widening in curiosity. Aizawa was dying to know too, but he composed himself. Well, as I told you before, my ability is that it can nullify others. So technically speaking, no powers can affect me, or at least the ones I've encountered before. Aizawa wondered if their quirks clashed. Would his quirk erase Dazai's nullifying one, or would he nullify Aizawa's quirk first? Unless, say, I'm a collateral from whatever ability that was activated. For example, if Chuuya here was hit with an ability that causes all living objects to stick to him. What the fuck is that stupid ability? I would also be affected by it and have to, unfortunately, stick to him. Dazai continued, ignoring his companion's question. I see. So you're saying that while you're able to nullify whatever quirk that's been used on you directly, there's a chance of it affecting you if it was used indirectly, is that right? Nezu simplified it, earning a nod from the brunette. Gosh, talking with someone on the same wavelength is so refreshing. Unlike someone, Dazai's comment earned a swift kick to the shin from Nakahara. So you're saying that there's someone with a quirk from our timeline that sort of summoned you here? That's a possibility, yes. Alright, I'll see what I can do. For now, you can rest at UA while we discuss our next course of action. Ishiyama-sensei, please show Dazai-kun and Nakahara-kun to the lounge. Perfect. We definitely need some rest after everything that happened. I'm sure you heroes know what's best to do, so we'll leave it to you. With that, Dazai hopped up and followed Cementos out along with Nakahara. The lack of protest made Aizawa feel wary. With how adamant the both had acted previously, it was hard to believe they'd accept Nezu's dismissal so easily. Was it because their numbers were at odds against them? It would indeed be foolish to provoke a fight in a room full of heroes. If that were the case, he could understand their behavior back on the field. Since his quirk didn't work on them and both Nimuri and Toshinori couldn't act, it's clear that they had the upper hand. However, there was still something that didn't sit right with him. Something rather interesting happened, Nezu commented with a gleam in his eyes. Aizawa didn't like the look of that. He was sure the principal would make this into one of his sick games to toy around with. You said he released the students when you agreed to his terms and the reinforcement came. Nezu directed his question to Aizawa. Yes, I think he realized he couldn't defeat us since the numbers were against him. Aizawa answered. That would be the logical explanation now, isn't it? Nezu said vaguely. From what I can tell, Dazai-kun is a smart kid. Perhaps as smart as me even with my high-spec quirk. He made a deal with you knowing that you won't go back on it. Then he released the students because he deemed them unnecessary and to paint a picture of innocence to the other teachers who had yet to arrive at the scene. Are you saying the kid planned all of this, right down to the moment in this room? Aizawa asked in disbelief. Indeed, he used logical reasoning to deduce the bandaged boy's actions. But if he really was as smart as Nezu praises him to be, then logic doesn't apply to him either. It's a stretch, but there's a high chance it is. Doesn't that make them highly dangerous then? UA is still in their sensitive period with all the villain attacks that occurred. We can't possibly accommodate two variables at this critical time. At this moment, all Aizawa could think of was the safety of his students despite how much he finds them insufferable. If the two boys would be a threat to their newfound peace, he wanted them out as soon as possible. But we can't just leave them. Even if we're being manipulated to do their biddings, we can't just abandon them, Toshinori said in a defeated tone. He looked like he was in a dilemma. He must have been shaken after witnessing his favorite student almost at death's door. But even if the symbol of peace is out of commission, he was still All Might, the #1 hero. We have to help them, because we're heroes. After that cube-looking cement dude left them at the school lounge to return to the conference room, Chuuya finally let out his pent-up frustration by stuffing his face into his hat and groaning loudly. Just 2 hours earlier they were busy taking down a drug ring Mori had ordered them to. They were just finishing up when a bright light flashed and they were falling. Never once had Chuuya felt so untouched by gravity as he was falling without knowledge of where was up and down. The trip had been so dizzying it made him unconscious, which was a deadly mistake that could cost him his life if he ended up at a different place. In a way, he's grateful he fell into a world run by righteous, justice-filled heroes, albeit how ridiculous it sounds. As for Dazai, he seemed totally unaffected by what's happening and was already scurrying off to snoop around. Eventually, he returned with a laptop he found lying somewhere around the lounge. Taking a seat beside Chuuya, he went to work immediately, his fingers flying through the keyboard. "How are you still so energetic in this situation?" Chuuya couldn't help but ask, knowing the brunette would tease him to no end about it. "It's not like we're stuck here forever, Chibai. There's still a chance of us returning." The ginger pointedly ignored the insulting nickname, seeing as he doesn't have the energy to fight back. Even if he did, that waste of bandages would just retort back and this would go on and on and on until someone stops them. "Yeah, but still, we're going to be stuck here for a while." "No, I'm afraid so. Not until we find who or what brought us here in the first place. So until then, I have to oh so graciously put up with your constant presence beside me that's eating up my brain cells every second." Dazai faked passing out dramatically, placing a hand over his forehead to sell the act. "Would it kill you to lay off the insults for one fucking day, you bastard?" Chuuya retorted weakly. There was no fight in his voice. "What are we supposed to do now? Are you sure it's all right just leaving the meeting like that?" "Oh, it's fine. I had everything under control when that tired-looking teacher agreed to let us speak with the principal." Dazai brushed the topic off like someone was just commenting about the weather. "You think they'll just let us stay and help us without question?" "Oh, I don't just think. I know they will." "Why?" Against his better judgment, Chuuya voiced out his question. "They say curiosity killed the cat. And right now, he was dying of curiosity. They just got transported into an unknown world." Yet Dazai was as sure of himself as ever. Even centuries apart, he still managed to read the people like a book. And perhaps Dazai really was feeling gracious today. Because for once, he forgoed teasing the ginger and answered truthfully without talking in roundabout ways. Because they're heroes. If you had told the Dazai of yesterday that he'd live to see the world 200 years later, he'd take a swan dive off the roof of the Port Mafia's headquarters while shooting himself in the head during the descent for extra measure. Even now, sitting in the spacious lounge of this UA hero school that's really just a front to produce child soldiers, he couldn't quite believe that this is what the world came to in just a measly 200 years. The world he was from was made in various shades of gray. Good and evil and everything in between coexisted in harmony. In this world, however, everything is only distinguished in either black or white, where both sides would never mix. Heroes and villains, good and evil. It honestly felt like a third-rate novel where the characters had no depth at all and the plot is just justice. It was an utter bore. Dazai makes a mental note to remind Otasaku to avoid these settings in the novel he plans on writing. "What are you doing anyways?" Chuuya scoots over to have a look at the laptop screen where Dazai had been busy working on for the past 15 minutes. "Well, Chuuya, while you were busy sulking like a little girl who's just been dumped," Dazai ducked to avoid the swing for his head, "I was busy gathering information about our new world. And you won't believe how easy it was to access all these otherwise considered top-secret information. I didn't even have to hack into the school's database to get them." Piqued by curiosity, Chuuya leaned over to read the webpage Dazai has on. The brunette held himself back from ruffling the ginger's bed of red hair. The last time he did that, he barely got out with a black eye and a nosebleed. "What's this? A hero forum?" Chuuya took away the laptop from Dazai's lap to get a closer look at it. His eyes scanned over the page briefly before scrolling down to do it again. "Oh, it's really nothing much. Just the basic information of the pro-heroes' quirks, which district they're stationed at and when they usually do patrols of the city," Dazai explained, the sarcasm in his tone evident. "And they just publicize it on the internet. What kind of idiot would do that?" Dazai was about to call him an idiot but decided against it. There would be another time for teasing and bickering. Chuuya needed to have a good grasp of the world they're in so they'd be at the same wavelength when Dazai hatches his plans later. "I'm positive they're just doing this for publicity. These so-called heroes are practically worshipped here, Dazai said, taking back the laptop from Chuuya's hands. It's such a big deal that there are multiple schools like this one to nurture them, though UA is one of the best. So like, child soldiers but in a glorified, legal way and strongly encouraged. Couldn't have said it better myself, Dazai hummed. Of course I can, but you get what I mean. Chuuya grumbled about something along the lines of arrogant bastard and self-centered shithead, which Dazai brushed off lightly. He then switched to a different site about the latest news, which is mostly just villain attacks and heroes swooping in to save the day and everything else found in cliché superhero comics. He clicked on a particular article and shifted the screen so Chuuya could have a good look too. League of Villains strike again. All for One appears after 20 years. What now? The final showdown between the superhero and supervillain? Chuuya rolled his eyes at the ridiculous heading only found in cartoons and comics. Your guess is on point actually, but that's not what I'm showing this to you for. Dazai scrolled down where a few portraits were showcased with the words villains plastered in bold. There are alternative plans should the heroes prove useless in aiding our return. Their tacky name aside, the LOV has the funds and resources that could help us in finding a way back. And how would we do that? You can't just waltz into enemy ground and demand they help us, Chuuya deadpan. That's exactly what we're going to do. I'll think of a way to convince them in the meantime. Dazai went back to doing his research on both heroes and villains. He had a somewhat basic understanding of the world they're in even without much information. All these people with such extreme ideals are just so predictable. Don't worry about it and just leave the convincing to me. I'll make it so they have no choice but to help us. You're impossible. After another 10 minutes of digging through every major news article since 2 centuries ago, Dazai has a good understanding on how this world came to be. In his timeline, ability users were a rarity. Not even 5% of the world's population possess an ability. However, somewhere down the line, a change occurred, causing over 80% of the population to manifest superhuman abilities called quirks. In light of the rapidly increasing population of humans who possess a superpower, there was a fundamental change in how the ability works. Abilities have certain rules that need to be followed in order to activate it, along with some restrictions. And while quirks can be used more freely, their strength has significantly declined. You take some, you lose some. Another point to note is how quirks started to manifest physically, causing the human's body anatomy to undergo mutations in order to support their quirks. Though Dazai can't quite wrap his head around how a literal rat managed to get an intelligence quirk. Thank God he doesn't have to deal with smartass rodents back in his world. Someone's coming, Chuuya alerted, fixing his laid-back posture and wiping the sulk from his face. Dazai shut the laptop and stuffed it into his coat. He was almost thankful for Mori giving him this coat. It was perfect for hiding stuff. Whoever this laptop belongs to, they'd have to get a new one. The door to the lounge swung open to reveal the tired-looking teacher, called Aizawa if he remembered correctly, and a shriveled-up blonde, All Might apparently, from the pictures taken during his showdown with All for One at the Camino ward. Oh great, has her meeting ended? So what's UA's decision? Dazai started, leaning forward to rest his chin on his palm. Before that, we have some questions for you. Aizawa and All Might took a seat directly across from them. It would have looked like an interrogation if the venue had been any different. Name and age. Dazai Osamu, 16. Nakahara Chuuya, 16. All Might jotted it down dutifully. All right, we know Dazai has a nullifying quirk. What's yours, Nakahara? Aizawa squinted at the ginger who returned to glare at him. Gravity manipulation, he answered truthfully, since Dazai didn't bother to conceal his ability. He didn't see the need to conceal his too. Oh, like young Uraraka, All Might muttered. Dazai vaguely remembers the name from when the broccoli head boy called out to them. Clearly, Chuuya's ability was much stronger than hers if she couldn't even lift a finger under his powers. Who are your parents? Aizawa continued. Dead. A pause. Dazai never found the prospect of being an orphan to be anything interesting enough to warrant a conversation. But it seems that it's seen as something pitiable in this world. Chuuya's unsmiling face morphed into a scowl at their pity. Dazai finds this aspect as something to be used. What about school? Schools are for kids. You're a kid, Aizawa deadpanned. Last I checked, we're technically 200 years older than you, Dazai shrugged. A sigh escaped from Aizawa. He's similar to Haratsu, Dazai noted, in a way where he has to put up with him. So both of you don't go to school. What do you do then? Mafia work. Mafia stuff. Another pause. You guys are affiliated with the Mafia. All Might sputtered out, disbelief written all over his face. But don't worry, Mori pays well. We're not victims of child labor or anything. Dazai would argue that Mori gives him too much work. And by that he means any work, but that's not the point here. Imagine the heroes' horrified looks if they discovered they're orphans and victims of child labor. I think he's worried about why 16-year-olds are in the Mafia, Chuuya corrected with a roll of his eyes. Is that why you possess a firearm? Aizawa looked even more exhausted than before. It's a dangerous place from where we come from, Dazai answered vaguely. Frankly speaking, the two of them were the biggest source of danger, especially to the Mafia's enemies. But they don't have to know that. The questioning session continued on. They only supplied the two heroes with brief answers that are enough to satisfy their curiosity. Though Dazai can tell there's a question they're dying to ask after finding out they're affiliated with the Mafia. Have you killed anyone? Eventually, the questions came to an end without any mention of killings. Principal Nezu and the teacher's board have all agreed to aid you in your return, Aizawa began. Then his voice turned stern. On the basis that you follow our rules, you're to act as transfer students during your stay here and keep the truth of your situation a secret. Is that clear? Ugh, fine. We'll go to school and act like studious little children. I guess it's the price we have to pay for winding up in this mess, Dazai sulked. From a very young age, Dazai only ever interacted with adults. While kids his age were still learning algebra, he was busy negotiating with the Mafia's partners. He can't imagine having to surround himself with immature kids his age. Only Chuuya was an exception. Having the ginger around was like adding colors into his dull, gray life. I guess Chuuya could use the education to develop his brain a little. You're the one who needs to learn how to shut the fuck up. You got him, piece of shit, Chuuya spat, elbowing the brunette's ribs. I'll add a rule. Mind your language when you're speaking, Aizawa demanded. You hear that, Chibai? Aizawa-sensei is asking you to cut down on the vulgar words in your speech. Chuuya pinched and twisted the skin at his side, earning a high-pitched yelp from Dazai. And Dazai, stop egging your friend. Hear that, you fuck, moron? Dazai snickered at his almost slip-up. Almost every sentence the ginger utters has a combination of curse words. It's part of his personality. For now, All Might will guide you to purchase your basic necessities during your stay here. Aizawa stood up, ready to leave. He held out his hand towards Dazai. Your gun. It's illegal for an unlicensed civilian to carry a firearm around. As if Dazai would hand over his only means of protection. NOOO. He whined, cradling his pistol close to his chest. A perfect excuse was already forming in his mind. This is the last keepsake of my late father before he was murdered. Don't take it away from me. Besides, I ran out of bullets already, so it's fine. At least let me keep this, please. Thankfully, Chuuya's flinch was barely noticeable. He kept his face unreadable as Dazai weaved his story. Fine, Aizawa finally relented after Dazai pulled out his puppy eyes. If it were anyone else in the Mafia who knew at least half of what he's capable of, they'd question if the infamous demon prodigy was possessed. Dealing with you is above my pay grade. He heard Aizawa mutter. Great, let's go explore our new world, Chuuya. Dazai hopped up enthusiastically. While his goal is to find a way to return as soon as possible, he isn't all that eager to return to Mafia work. He'd just have to treat this experience as a vacation. Look at the bright side, they say. Stop sounding like a 5-year-old going to an amusement park for the first time, Chuuya huffed, standing up beside him. Aizawa left first to inform Nezu of their earlier questioning, leaving All Might alone the both of them. So, shall we? He said awkwardly. Dazai nodded with a wide grin on his face. Hopping along behind the hero, he wonders how much the world had evolved aside from the increased number of people possessing superhuman ability. On their walk out of the UA building, Chuuya leaned over to whisper, is that gun really your late father's? No, it's the old boss's prized possession I pestered Mori into giving me. He whispered back. Of course you did, Chuuya replied, exasperated. At least he won't feel so lonely being stranded in an unknown world with Chuuya here. During his years as a hero, Toshinori had faced off against countless villains, yet none of them had unsettled him as much as these two teenagers have. Sure, All for One is basically evil incarnate, but at least his nature was clear. Not these two though. One moment the kid had a gun pointed at his successor's head, threatening to kill him where he stands. The next, Toshinori found himself pitying the boy for having lost his parents. He felt conflicted towards the kid. Unlike his friend, who was more expressive with his emotions where Toshinori could tell when he was angry or frustrated, this kid was just unreadable. It felt like he was wearing a mask each time. Just when Toshinori thought he had uncovered his mask, another replaces it. When the retired hero had locked eyes with him, he felt like he was facing a cold-hearted killer. The boy's amber eyes looked so dead as though his very life had been sucked out, leaving only an empty vessel behind without a soul. But when he noticed the numerous bandages that covered almost every inch of the boy's skin, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of hardships he'd been through. He was only 16, the same age as his successor and everyone else in Class 1A. Kids at this age were still thinking about their dreams and worrying over their exams, not working in a mafia surrounded by violence and death. Young Dazai, he mustered up his courage to voice out his question. I hope I'm not intruding, but may I ask why you're wearing so many bandages? But you are intruding on my privacy though. Dazai blinked, then blinked again before averting his gaze and skipping ahead. Oh, Toshinori faltered. This was his first time he was shut down so brutally by a kid, and he even prided himself on being great with kids. How embarrassing. Don't bother. He's just a pain in the ass to talk to, Chuuya said, walking past him to catch up with his companion. Young Nakahara, just Chuuya is fine. Young Chuuya, didn't Aizawa tell you to mind your language? He reminded. Doesn't that rule only apply to when I'm speaking in front of him? Chuuya asked, an eyebrow raised in question. Toshinori didn't have an answer to that. Did Aizawa mean for the boy to mind his language in front of him only? Hey, Chuuya, look, an arcade. Dazai gestured for his friend to hurry up while pointing at a store from across the street. Loser calls the winner master for a week. You're on. I'll be sure to kick your ass this time. Don't come crying to me when you lose with that. The duo took off towards the arcade without warning. And to Toshinori's horror, both of them did it without looking at incoming traffic. Luckily, the cars were relatively slow at this part of the city with so many pedestrians walking about. Watch where you're going, boys. Toshinori followed them anxiously, frantically apologizing to all the cars who were forced to emergency brake because of them. And we're supposed to shop for your basic necessities. We can't get sidetracked now. All of his words fell on deaf ears though. It wasn't only until 2 hours later that Toshinori managed to convince them to leave. Judging from Nakahara's dejected look compared to Dazai's triumphant one, it wasn't difficult to guess who won. Come on, Chuuya, let's hear it. Congratulate your master now. Dazai taunted, putting a hand over his ear while leaning towards the ginger. Congratulations. Mast, ARGHH. I'm not satisfied. I want a rematch. Chuuya bellowed. NOOO. Hey, Toshinori-san, can you go buy us some liquor? What? You're 16. It's illegal for you to drink. Toshinori sputtered. But in our timeline, 16 is already a legal age to drink. Plus, we're over 200 years old, so we're more than qualified, Dazai reasoned. Still, UA forbids alcohol inside. What about this, Toshinori-san? No, you do not need rollerblades, young Dazai. What about this? It's freaking cool. You do not need a Nerf cannon too, young Chuuya. This? Where did you even get that chameleon from, young Dazai? How do I look? Dazai struck a pose. PFFT. BAHAHAHAHAHA. I need to save this. Young Dazai, stop stuffing clothes into your chest. Chuuya looks great in pink. Dazai assessed from afar. Well, when did you even DAZAAAII? Young Chuuya, don't run around in a ballerina tutu. By the time the sun began to set, Toshinori was completely drained of his energy. Not even fighting villains day and night was as exhausting as this. He might have to reevaluate how chaotic Class 1 is compared to these two teenagers. He can't even begin to imagine just how Aizawa is supposed to handle both Class 1 and them at the same time. Toshinori suddenly felt the need to give that man a pat on the back. He's got a long way ahead of him if they want to find a way for them to return. Hey, Chuuya, you think they invented a way to commit suicide painlessly after 2 centuries? Dazai prodded the teenager beside him with his finger. How the fuck would I know? Don't rope me into your suicide bullshit. Chuuya grumbled, trying to put some distance between them because of Dazai's incessant poking. While that wasn't the most insane thing Toshinori heard escape from the teenager's mouth, it was certainly the most concerning. And their interaction on the topic of suicide was so natural it made him assume this wasn't just the first time Dazai had mentioned it before. That would explain why he looked so empty when he first locked eyes with the kid. Back then when he first met Midoriya on the rooftop and told him it was better to give up on being a hero if he was quirkless, the same empty look had appeared in the boy's eyes. However, that was only for a passing moment. For Dazai, it seemed to have existed for all his life. Even when he was goofing off with Chuuya, that empty look of his was only toned down a little before returning at full force when the moment was over. The bandages, the empty look in his eyes no kids his age should have, the way he turns to violence and death with no hesitation, the mentions of suicide. The more he thinks about it, the more he finds himself feeling sympathy for the very person who threatened to kill his students. Maybe it was his hero instincts calling out to him, or perhaps it was just his human side that's pleading to him. But never had Toshinori felt the need to save someone so desperately like now. Of course, saving Bakugo from the League of Villains is one thing. The boy was in mortal danger for God's sake. But Dazai was different. It felt like he was teetering at the edge of a cliff. One light push and he'll be sent plunging into the endless darkness beneath. As a hero, the #1 hero and symbol of peace in fact, Toshinori couldn't possibly ignore this silent plea for help. It was his job to bring light to people at their darkest moments, to show them love and care, and to bring them hope. Meddling when you don't need to ... That is the essence of being a hero, he once told Midoriya. Young Dazai, such constant mention of suicide is bad for your mental health. Toshinori finally caught up with the two boys. Don't blame him, but walking around town with so many bags from their shopping endeavors was tiring. Not to mention the two teenagers who seemed to have no end to their energy supply. If there's anything troubling you, please don't hesitate to speak up. I'll do whatever I can to help. A pause. The two blinked simultaneously, looked at each other, then blinked again. It made Toshinori self-conscious and wondered if he said the wrong thing again. While I do appreciate the effort, All Might, I'll have to respectfully decline, Dazai said evenly. But I know it's your job and all to save people as a hero, but I'll have to remind you that we're from different generations. Heroes don't exist in my timeline. Again, that empty look in the boy's eyes. So I would appreciate it if you don't try to push your ideals on me. Besides, what's the point in trying to save me? By the time we return, I'd already be dead in your timeline, so what difference does it make? Toshinori didn't have an answer to that, just like how he doesn't have an answer as to why he wants to save the boy. Dazai has a point. Either way, he'd already be dead when he returned to his timeline, so why bother? But still, letting the boy be just didn't sit right with his conscience. He at least has to try helping him. But, young Daza, that's enough, All Might. Not everyone needs saving. Toshinori felt a door was slammed shut in his face. Chuuya forgot going to school entails having to wear uniforms considering how he has never attended one before. He should have anticipated it when he subdued those kids yesterday. Ugh, this is suffocating, he muttered, pulling his tie loose. He never liked to wear ties in the first place, though Dazai seems pretty chill about it. That sick bastard probably enjoys the feeling of being suffocated. Oh come on, Chuuya. It's your first day of school. At least be a little excited about it. Dazai chirped from beside him. The ginger gave him a once-over, noting how his tie hung a little loose too. It was Chuuya's first time seeing the mackerel in colors other than black and white, and the occasional red from their enemy's blood. He actually looked like an ordinary student, provided you look past all the bandages he's wearing. You act like we're on vacation, Chuuya pointed out. Enthusiasm was basically radiating out of Dazai's body as though he had discovered a way to die a peaceful and painless death. Never had Chuuya seen him so genuinely excited about something so mundane as going to school. It's rare to have days where we don't have to be taking down various drug rings or making our prisoners spit out information. The least I could do is enjoy it, Dazai shrugged, twirling in his new uniform like a little girl. I'll have to ask Mori to give us more days off like this. Doing paperwork day in and day out is exhausting. You talk as if you don't just shove all your workload on me, Chuuya grumbled under his breath. But Dazai's right. It's rare to have days where they're not constantly in danger of being killed. Don't get him wrong. Getting to beat the shit out of Port Mafia's enemies or people that threatened him is pure bliss. But Chuuya sometimes just wants to let down his hair and enjoy a quiet day without any violence or bloodshed. Though Dazai's presence in their little time-traveling trip will be anything but quiet. Aizawa suddenly stopped in front of a colossal door that was at least 6 meters high with the words 1A written on it vertically. Before Dazai could comment something about his height in the door, Aizawa turned to face them. I'm sure you already know this, but I'll remind you again. The truth about your arrival here is to be kept a secret. Under no circumstance are you to expose it to anyone other than the staff members. The way he talked was like he was reminding a child to brush their teeth before bed and remember to wear their underwear. Although Chuuya didn't like it, he kept quiet. I've already informed Midoriya and the others to keep your secret, so there's no need to worry about them spilling it. Yes, sir, Aizawa-sensei, Dazai replied in mock salute. Chuuya only grumbled out an indiscernible yes. Aizawa sighed, finding their responses the most he could get out of them. Good, and be nice to your classmates, he said sternly. Chuuya could tell the teacher was still holding a grudge for treating his precious students so roughly yesterday. It's not like they did anything too serious. In fact, they were going easy on them. Why else would they have managed to get off unscathed with barely any scratches? They were Sakoku, the notorious duo in the underground world of Yokohama, for fuck's sake. Aizawa slid open the door, announcing his arrival to the class without saying a word. The once rowdy classroom quietened down a bunch, the students returning to their respectful seats. However, when Aizawa entered the classroom with 2 unknown teenagers wearing their uniforms, the class exploded with a cacophony of noises. Settle down, Aizawa said, slamming his hand on the podium to catch their attention. The students quietened down considerably, but whispers and mutters still continued on. As you can guess, we have 2 new transfer students that'll be joining us for the rest of the semester. They're from a private Yokohama Hero Institute. Chuuya tuned out the teacher's explanation, opting to study the rest of the class instead. Somehow, that bastard Dazai managed to hack into the school system and got the files of their soon-to-be classmates, so Chuuya recognized all of them. Conniving bastard. The mackerel was to blame too for the dark eye bags that were hanging heavily below his eyes from pulling an all-nighter to study the students' information. The students with mutation quirks were what kept him up mostly, like that pink alien girl and the half-bird, half-human kid. As he scanned over the students, some with excited and expectant gazes, others more composed, he spotted the 3 students that they had unfortunately stumbled on upon their arrival. He squinted, studying their expressions. Looks of apprehension and wariness were casted towards Dazai and him. He watched them squirm uncomfortably in their seats, unable to share their class's excitement. Chuuya scoffed. Just that bit of intimidation and already they look scared enough they could piss their pants. How boring. He expected much more coming from the proclaimed best heroes school. Be nice to them. He heard Aizawa finish. Then the man gestured for them to introduce themselves, which Dazai complied enthusiastically. Dazai Osamu, at your service. Pleasure to meet you. I hope we get along and I managed to find a beauty to commit. Chuuya kicked the brunette's shin before he could finish his sentence and startle their new classmate. While Chuuya didn't really give a shit about what others thought of him, he'd rather not be associated with the suicidal maniac and his psychopathic tendencies. Nakahara Chuuya. Just call me Chuuya, that's all, he said curtly, if he comes out as rude and standoffish to his new classmates. He couldn't care less. He wasn't here to make friends with a bunch of immature teenagers who only saw the bright side of the world and believed in the righteous, commit no evil path. He didn't need friends. The last time he had them, they either betrayed him or were murdered brutally. Dazai was an exception though. While he only considered the waste of bandages as nothing more than an annoying business partner, that cockroach-like bastard was basically immune to death. The irony. A moment of silence as the whole class seemed to glance at the greenhead, Midoriya Izuku was it, or broccoli head as Dazai calls him, who had his head bowed and was staring intently at his table, like he didn't want to make eye contact with them, even if it was only for a fleeting moment. What are your quirks then? The kid with yellow hair and a black streak along, Kaminari Denki if Chuuya remembers correctly, raised his hands to ask. Chuuya cringed at the word quirk, though he kept his face straight on the outside. Couldn't they have used a better word? Like abilities or superpowers? Scratch that, superpowers sound lame. I have a nullification ability, much like your sensei here. Though mine activates through touch, Dazai explained. Chuuya had been reminded that since this is technically the future where the port Mafia didn't exist, there was no need to conceal too much information. Gravity manipulation. Guess corruption should be kept under wraps. It would be way too unbelievable if he said it to these kids here. And the principal might think twice about letting someone as dangerous as him be in the same room as the promising young heroes of UA. Distantly, he heard someone murmur, similar to Ochako-chan's. His eyes flitted over to the girl with a chubby face, the same one he had accidentally broke a rib under the influence of his gravity. Can't say he was sorry for it though. When Uraraka Ochako locked eyes with him, she averted her gaze almost instantly, her complexion growing paler as her fidgets increased. When Chuuya had read about her, he thought he'd found someone who shares a common interest with him. But it seems that now, the girl was too afraid to even look at him. A shame. Was there really something to be so afraid of? Sure, back in his timeline, his and Dazai's name would have sowed fear into the hearts of their enemies. But it's not like Saokoku's influence reached this generation. Right, okay, maybe breaking a rib had shaken her a little but she looks fine right now, so all's good. If you don't mind, what's with all the bandages? Are you hurt or something? A boy with red hair and spiky teeth, Kirishima Ijiru, asked curiously. Right, he's been so used to Dazai wearing all those bandages since they first met that he forgets to others. It would seem unsettling. Or that maybe people would assume he's involved in a case of abuse even though he's the one tormenting everyone around him. When Dazai gave no indication of responding, he was about to tell the boy to mind his business and be done with it. The topic of Dazai's bandages is a sensitive one. Not even he was privy to it. But of course Dazai's deflection ability is top tier, and it comes at the price of his dignity. This may be shocking to you, but these bandages help to keep the black flame dragon in me from going berserk and end up destroying the world. A beat. Then the room erupted with uncontrollable laughter to fill in the awkward silence after Dazai revealed the truth behind his bandages. It did not help that the mackerel was striking a dramatic pose with one of his hands clutching the eye wrapped in bandages. Chuuya stared at the brunette for a good long second with his jaw slack at the sheer unbelievability of the shit that he just spouted. Heat was rising to his cheeks as the laughter continued. Even the three students who avoided their gazes had looked up in disbelief, their fear and apprehension forgotten. Never had Chuuya felt the urge to dig a hole and bury himself in it so strong as of now, preferably after he throws that idiot off a fucking building first. What kind of fucking bullshit is this extra spewing? The explosion kid commented. Is this some kind of Chunobiu disease? The girl with extended ears wondered. Wait, are you for real? The boy with a Spider-Man-like quirk asked. God forbid he doesn't commit murder in front of 20 young heroes in the making. That scene would be too gruesome and gory for the likes of them. While Chuuya was still contemplating on his plans for bloody murder, Aizawa recovered first to calm the chaos that was his students down. The man really looked like he could use 30 hours of sleep, and the fact that he had to deal with both of them on top of having to keep 20 chaotic students in line was sure to be taxing on his sleep schedule. Dazai for the most part. Alright, that's enough jokes for now. Go ahead and take a seat. Homeroom ends at 15. Chuuya was eager to shed the spotlight off of him after the stunt that Dazai pulled. Fuck, he was going to have a good word with the mackerel about doing embarrassing stuff in his vicinity. As the both of them weaved between their classmates' tables to get to theirs, Chuuya pinched the flesh of Dazai's back viciously. He leapt up and a high-pitched yelp escaped his mouth, turning the attention of the students towards them again. Wrong move. Chuuya sped up and plopped into his seat quickly while the mackerel was still rubbing at the sore spot on his back. Chuuya's a meanie. The mackerel whined when he took the seat beside him. The ginger flipped him off in response, careful to avoid letting Aizawa see. And if Dazai's aggravating presence isn't enough already, the students decided it was a good idea to swarm around them, severely invading his personal space. Nice to meet you. I'm Ashido Mina. The pink girl shoved her face forward, filling up his entire vision. If that had been Dazai, he would have smacked his face away. But since this was his new classmate and he was supposed to be nice, he held back. Chuuya inched away from her, hoping it doesn't seem too disrespectful. And I'm Hagakure Toru. Invisible Girl chimed in. Even while knowing mutations were common in humans to accommodate their quirks, he still can't get used to seeing someone invisible with just their clothes floating around. The other students started introducing themselves too, even if it wasn't needed since Chuuya had already read through their files. Still, he supposes he should play along. Name's Kirishima Ijiru, Kaminari Denki. I'm Shiro Hanta, and that angry-looking guy is Bakugo Katsuki. Oi, flat face, don't be so fucking nosy. I've never heard of a Yokohama Hero Institute before. What's it like there? The girl with a black ponytail, Yaoyorozu Momo, inquired. That's a secret. Dazai winked flirtatiously, a finger over his lips in shushing motion. That move of his seemed to excite the first two girls who had introduced themselves first, throwing the brunette sparkling gazes. Since it's a private institute, not many people know about them. Then how do you enroll into it? Jiru Kyoyuka asked, while twirling the extended part of her ear. Chuuya was tempted to pull it for some reason. Were recruited specially. Dazai lied smoothly, leaving no loopholes for the others to discover. Based on what criteria? The boy with heterochromia eyes and hair, Todoroki Shoto, followed up. This boy had one of the more powerful quirks in his class. Chuuya remembered. Not as powerful as his though, obviously. Our quirks are just stronger than most, I guess. Huh? Are you implying our quirks are weak, you bandaged freak? Bakugo yelled. He seemed ready to explode at a moment's notice. Chuuya deduced that either one's quirk has influence over their character or the other way around. Your words, not mine, Dazai shrugged, pissing off the blonde even more. Shiro had to hold him back from lunging at the smug bastard. While he may not agree with Bakugo's aggressive behavior, he does welcome anyone who has the same sentiment of wanting to beat the shit out of Dazai. He's like a bigger version of you, Chuuya. But louder and pissier, Dazai whispered. Now it was Chuuya holding on to the last thread of sanity that was going to snap at any moment. As punishment, the brunette received a swift blow to his ribs by his trusty elbow. What's the difference between there and Yue? Kirishima asked, ignoring his blonde friend who was still trying to free himself from Shiro's grasp. It's more combat-oriented. Dazai's story continued on. Whatever lie the mackerel was weaving, it seemed to capture the students' interests perfectly. All of them wanted to hear more. We spend more time doing field training and mock battles. For privacy purposes, I won't say which hero, but we're more likely to do infiltration missions and intel gathering. So you guys don't even involve yourselves in direct fights. Bakugo scoffed, a nasty smirk on his face. More powerful quirks, my ass. You extras don't even amount to much. Damn, this kid was seriously getting on his nerves. It's been a while since he had thrown hands. He was itching to fight. Beating Dazai's ass doesn't count because he feels more exhausted than exhilarated when doing it. Oh my god, I can't believe there's someone with more brawn than brains than you, Chibai. Dazai exclaimed in mock surprise. Whose fucking side is this fucking bastard on, really? Only Dazai could manage to insult both sides of the party with just one sentence. Worse still is him making it sound like a compliment. You're really asking for a beating. Huh, you shitty mackerel. Huh, the fuck you said. Chill, Bikubro. It's just a joke. Now both Shiro and Kirishima had to hold back the angry gremlin. Don't mind my friend. He can be a bit expressive. Let me go, shitty hair. Anyway, where the hell was Aizawa during all this mess? Chuuya looked around, but couldn't find a trace of that tired-looking teacher's whereabouts. Then his eyes snagged on a bright yellow worm lying behind the podium. It took him a while to realize it was Aizawa huddled inside a sleeping bag. Seriously, have you guys gotten your hero license yet? Ashido turned their attention back to her, obviously already used to the boy's shenanigans. My hero name is Pinky, by the way. That's still in the process of being approved, since we plan to debut as duo heroes that operate under one name. Oh, I've never heard of a duo hero before. What will your hero name be then? Saokoku. It was Chuuya who replied then. He doesn't know why, but his mouth moved before he could think. The ginger caught Dazai's gaze then, who gave him a mischievous smile. He turned around, feeling the heat rising to his cheeks. That's a cool name. Why as a duo though, if you don't mind me asking? Because I'm the absolute offense, Chuuya began. and I'm the absolute defense," Dazai finished. As the both of them continued to entertain their classmates' questions, Chuuya felt a murderous gaze which alarmed him. He turned abruptly, expecting to find an enemy, but instead found the boy with balls for hair staring at them intently, his face scrunched up disgustingly. "Why are you wearing a choker when accessories are forbidden? Are you trying to impress the girls? Is that what you're trying to do? To act cool and stylish?" "Huh, great boy," Minta Minoru asked threateningly. He remembered reading about this sick pervert. How did he even get into the hero course with that stupid quirk of his? Chuuya was about to snap and tell him to mind his business, but then he felt someone grab his neck from the back. "That's because Chuuya's my dog." Dazai appeared right beside Chuuya, his voice dangerously low. His fingers fiddled with the edge of his choker. Each brush of his fingertips on bare skin sent a bolt of lightning to his nerves. Too close. Too fucking close. Chuuya doesn't need to see to know he was blushing profusely. Because of anger, not embarrassment. Kyaaaa. Both Ashido and Hagakure squealed, pressing their bodies together. Fuck, they were misinterpreting the situation. Before he could even attempt to defuse whatever situation this is, the bell rang, a sign for the students to return to their seats. As he watched the two girls giggling to themselves while walking away, he could already tell this was going to be a long, agonizing day. Dazai couldn't care less about whatever the teachers rattled on in front of the class. Even after going through 200 years of change and evolution, the school system was still relatively the same. Not that he went to one before, but he knew enough about it to know it was an utter waste of time. Languages were elementary. History is boring, and science and maths had barely any breakthrough in 2 centuries after quirks took the world by storm. He wonders if those nerdy scientists and mathematicians ditched their work to go play hero in spandex suits. Though he is interested in the changes of human anatomy due to all the mutation quirks, maybe he could convince one of them to let him dissect them, like that frog girl and bird boy. What intrigues him even more is that his ability can't undo their mutations. Before, while no one was looking, he made contact with Hagakure subtly, yet nothing happened. His ability was absolute. Just one brush and it would deactivate any abilities that were in use. Yet Hagakure remained invisible. Dazai supposes his ability doesn't identify their mutation quirk as a foreign power, but rather a part of their genetics that makes the organism whole. Though Dazai still has to find out if his ability can cause their mutations to be rendered useless. With nothing better to do, he started doodling on his notebook. And by doodling, he meant drawing ugly pictures of Chuuya and throwing them to him. Thankfully, they were seated at the last row, so they were fairly unnoticeable by the teachers. He saw the Hatrak grit his teeth, then crumpled the paper in his hands, then no more. He was kinda expecting him to retaliate in some form. But the slug was suspiciously tame and quiet. Strange. To get a rise out of Chuuya was easier than taking candy from a baby. Dazai knew exactly which buttons to press for the ginger to go full berserk mode on him. If he had treasured his life a fraction more, he would refrain from doing something as stupid as that. But aggravating the ginger was just so amusing. After a series of meddling and prodding that drew almost zero reaction from the ginger, the bell for recess rang. "Join us for lunch, man." Kirishima came over to invite them, Kaminari and Siro nodding along behind. "Yeah, we could even show you around the campus." Ashido appeared right beside them then. Dazai supposes they're the extroverted clique of the class, the type he'd rather stay away from. Socializing was a pain if it didn't benefit him in some way. Though Chuuya might fit right in, considering how they took that blonde gremlin in their care. Sure, he says outwardly, as if he didn't already memorize the entire layout of UAS campus the night before. It was crucial to know exactly where the security cameras and exits are when he's in foreign territory. Call it survival instincts, no matter how ironic it was. "Thanks for your help. Are you extras done talking yet?" Bakugo calls out from a distance away. Damn, he really was like Chuuya in some ways. From his explosive temper to the way he stands with his hands tucked in his pockets. Even with how he wears his feelings on his sleeves and how his solution to everything is violence. Well, if the Chibai wants to ignore him, he'll just find a different victim. They followed the group of rowdy teenagers out of the class. They were having a conversation about the soap opera they watched last night, with Bakugo shit-talking about the cast's outfit choices. Right, the kids' parents work in the fashion industry, a most bizarre combo really. While they weren't paying attention, Dazai grabbed Chuuya's arm and pulled him into another, quieter hallway. Without security cameras. "The fuck? Where are we going?" he asked, following the brunette despite his obvious reluctance. Almost like a dog, Dazai thought. "Oh, so Chuuya can speak. I was starting to worry when you didn't blow up like you used to when I'm annoying you." "Oh, so you do know you're annoying me, you fucker." Chuuya grumbled back. "It's part of my job description, you know." Dazai shrugged, ducking out of the way when Chuuya tried to grab him. "Great. Lol, Chuuya is back. I like this version of Chuuya more, anyway." "Ugh, why do I even try?" Chuuya muttered under his breath. "Just spit out what you want to say, bastard." "I want to eat." Yes, yes. How dare I try to rob Chuuya from getting the nutrition he needs to grow taller even if it's wishful thinking. This time, Dazai lets Chuuya smack him over the head. Anyway, I tried accessing all of Mori's bank accounts with the ATM machine in school yesterday. He took out the card holder wallet he swiped from Mori just before he went on his fateful mission that brought him here. Wait, what? Did you steal that from the boss? Chuuya asked as if it wasn't already obvious that he did, though he suspects Mori already knows and just lets him. Don't worry though, I left Elise's shopping bank account card behind, and that's supposed to be better. Chuuya rolled his eyes. Anyway, as I was saying, I tried accessing Mori's bank accounts, Dazai continued on. But of course all of them were already disabled after such a long time, except for one. One's still working. Yup, it's an emergency bank account where Mori keeps a set amount of money if the Port Mafia ever collapses. If Dazai had been told the Port Mafia will cease to exist in the future, he'd laugh. But reality was right in front of him. The Port Mafia had disappeared, with no records of it ever existing. So what? The boss left us some money to help us. Don't just take it at face value, Chibai. As if Mori is ever that simple, Dazai said flatly. If anything, that slimy boss of his was the most complicated being ever. Everything the man did has an ulterior motive behind that he always tasks Dazai on figuring out rather than just telling him straightly. There was a code message, return quickly, it says, and he left us a random amount of money, which is strange for Mori. Wanna take a wild guess on what those number digits mean? Coordinates, Chuuya said after a while of pondering. Ding ding ding. See, you could do it too if you just used your brains. Chuuya punched his side lightly, without his usual force. Well, when are we leaving? Chuuya asked, his expression already lighting up at finding a clue that could bring them home. But what Dazai's puzzled about is how Mori knew they were in the future. If someone just randomly disappears, you'd think they were either kidnapped or ran away. But this was Saokoku. They're the ones doing the kidnapping, not the other way around. Even then, Mori's first guess would have been they were transported somewhere, because the prospect of traveling through time is just too unbelievable. But Mori guessed it right. Or maybe there were some clues left behind that suggested it. If so, what clues exactly? We can't go there. At least not yet since we're heavily guarded by UAS security. Well, Dazai could technically attempt to hack the security system of UA, but that would take way too long and might even backfire on him instead. If something goes wrong, they might be put on probation while the pro heroes go and find a solution so they can return. While it is tempting to let others do his work for him, Dazai doesn't exactly trust the hero's capabilities. Then what the hell are we supposed to do? Chuuya said, deflated. What Dazai can't understand is why he's so desperate to return. Mori keeps piling work on him, he doesn't even have time to attempt his newest suicide method. Or maybe that was his intention from the beginning. I meant what I said last time. Think of this as vacation, Dazai shrugged, even though attending school with a bunch of teenagers while on house arrest barely counts as one. It's not like we had the chance of experiencing a normal life like this, Chibai. Saying what he needed to, Dazai turned the corner to go to the cafeteria. That's when he almost face-planted into someone's chest. What are you guys doing here? Came Aizawa's tired voice. Well, he's definitely an underground hero with such little presence that Dazai didn't even notice him until he almost bumped into the hero. The Lover's Rendezvous, Dazai said without thinking. A secluded corner where not many people passed, not to mention the lack of security cameras aimed their way. A prime spot for lovers to hang out, and for them to plot. What the fuck are you talking about, you fucking imbecile? Dazai was going to go deaf if he continued staying beside the Chibai. His vocal cords range was incredible for someone as small as him. Nakahara, language, Aizawa sighed, rubbing his temples like he has a headache. And keep your nonsense to yourselves. Recess ends in 20 minutes. Quickly go to the cafeteria if you don't want to starve. Aye, sir. Dazai went around Aizawa, pulling Chuuya's arm from behind. He wonders if Aizawa was there by coincidence or if he was only acting. But from his reaction, it seems like he really was there by coincidence. Oh well, whatever. By the time he reached Lunch Rush Cafeteria, the place was bustling with students. It didn't take them long to find their friendly, extroverted group of friends nonetheless. What with them being one of the loudest tables ever, courtesy to Bakugu's constant yelling. Dazai finds it amusing because that's how he locates Chuuya too. Oh, you guys are finally here. Kaminari noticed them and waved them over. You guys suddenly disappeared, so we thought you got lost. Chuuya was just walking at a snail's pace, so I had to slow down and follow him in case he got lost. He's got rather short legs and terrible with directions. Dazai imitated a whispering pose, yet his voice was loud enough to be overheard. Stop spouting bullshit, you fucker. Dazai evaded Chuuya's stomp, taking a seat beside Zero, the sanest one in this friend group. We don't know when you guys will be back, so we took your lunch for you already, Ashido said with her mouth full, sliding over 2 trays of food. Bakugu yelled at her to not talk with food in her mouth. Anyway, we'll take you on a rough tour later, Kirishima interjected, calming his angry friend down. You guys should eat up. We got practical training later. Dazai looked at his food, prodded it with a fork, took a small nibble of the broccoli, then concluded he was done with it. He pushed his tray towards Chuuya subtly, knowing the ginger's big appetite contrary to his small stature. At least eat a little. Mackerel, Chuuya mumbled. Dazai pretends he didn't hear it and continues his conversation with the others to distract them from noticing he isn't eating. Speaking of, Midoriya is acting kinda weird today. You'd think he'd be all excited about newcomers and bug them about their quirks, Kaminari commented while eating his yogurt. You think something happened? TCH, that damn nerd was always weird. Who cares what happened to him? Bakugo said rudely. Dazai scanned the cafeteria, finding the unmistakable patch of green hair seated at a couple tables in front of theirs. He was with Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki and Isui, seemingly very relaxed and excited while engaged in a conversation. Dazai remembered how he didn't even dare to look up at him when they were introducing themselves. We met that Midoriya kid yesterday. Actually, Dazai explained, kind of got off the wrong foot. Maybe that's why he's acting so distant. They didn't just get off the wrong foot. He almost killed him and Chuuya almost crushed his friends with gravity. But at least he's good at keeping secrets. Whoa, what did you do, man? Midoriya's like the nicest guy ever. I can't imagine someone not getting along with him, other than Bakugo of course. Zero raised his brows in question. The fuck you mean? Deku's an annoying prick. Only weirdos get along with him. Dazai doesn't know why, but it felt like he was getting approval from that blonde. He knows their relationship isn't the greatest, but just how bad could it be that he would actually approve of someone who had insulted him previously just because he didn't get along with the kid? An enemy of the enemy is a friend. Or some shit. I kind of pointed a gun at him, I guess. What? You pointed a gun at him? Kaminari blurted out. He could hear Chuuya choking beside him. You have a gun. Calm down, it's just my weapon, Dazai shrugged. Since heroes were equipped with all kinds of equipment that aids their quirk usage, it really shouldn't be so weird to have a gun. For example, that snipe hero. I'm a weak person, I need something to protect myself with. But still, guns are kinda cool. The only other hero I know that uses a gun is Snipe. Would they say the same if he told them said gun had taken the lives of many? How a pull of the trigger with his fingers had robbed the lives of so many people. In the end, Dazai decided against it. He and Chuuya needed a place to stay, and UA was perfect for it. So keeping up appearances with the school's students was a wise choice. Anyway, what are we doing for practical training? Chuuya finally joined in on their conversation after finishing both his and Dazai's plate, evidently trying to steer the topic away from their not-so-peaceful encounter with their classmate. I heard we're having a sparring session today. For us to improve our close combat skills, Kirishima replied. Chuuya perked up at the answer, his brows rising higher in delight. Ah, yes, the petite mafioso has a knack for kicking and beating people up and enjoys it greatly. He was probably itching for a fight after being dropped here to let out his frustrations. Shibai, don't look so excited about being able to beat up kids, Dazai reminded. To say that UAS Gymnasium, Gym Gamma as they call it, is spacious is a huge understatement. It looks to be even bigger than the Port Mafia's training quarters, Dazai reckons. It was close to 6 stories high with 2 floors of balcony to overlook the place. Why aren't you changing in the locker rooms? We're having practical training now. Aizawa's voice suddenly popped up from behind him. Seriously, he has minimal to no presence at all. He could only sense the man if he knew the hero was coming. Don't wanna, I'm exhausted, so I'm sitting this one out, Dazai sing-songed. Fighting is Chuuya's forte. His role is to supply strategic plans and order his lackeys around. Getting all physical is so unclassy and brutish, much like Chuuya. Besides, I'm too weak to even pose a challenge to these young, aspiring heroes. Aizawa frowned at his statement, his eyes full of distrust. Heh, sharp guy. You're here as a transfer student, Dazai. I expect you to involve yourself in the class activities too. Aizawa sounds like a stern parent giving their problematic child a lesson. He's kind of like Otasaku in that aspect. Just like how Otasaku has to take care of a bunch of mischievous orphan brats, Aizawa had to put up with 20 teenagers with the mentality of a 3-year-old. They share the same vibe and unkempt appearance too. Hey, what difference does it make? Dazai shrugged, taking the stairs to the 2nd floor balcony. Just write in your report that I have period cramps or something. Not bothering to find out how Aizawa's reacting, Dazai finally reached the balcony. Looking down, he realized this was a pretty awkward height, because if he were to jump, there was a 50-50 chance that he might survive while breaking a bone or two. While he was calculating how to make his death assured, Class 1 appeared in their PE outfits with all might in tow. It didn't take long for him to spot Chuuya. He'd always be able to pick that slug out in a crowd easily. As if sensing his gaze, the ginger looked up, locking gazes with Dazai. He wriggled his fingers at him as a greeting, but the Hattrack only ignored him and rolled his eyes. Rude. Toshinori joined Aizawa and him on the balcony after saying something to the broccoli kid and patting his back. Weird. They seem unnaturally close for a teacher and student. He's aware that Midoriya is a hardcore fan of All Might. What with all the merchandise he saw on the boy, but this blatant favoritism was something else. Young Dazai, aren't you going to participate? Toshinori asked when he saw him. Contained within those cerulean blue eyes, similar to Chuuya's, Dazai noted, of his was genuine kindness and concern. Perhaps not that similar. His was like the blue of a calm sea in the vast sky, while Chuuya's was a bright, burning blue flame that would incinerate anything it touches, yet you'd still be inexplicably drawn to them. Nah, I have period cramps. Pardon, just ignore him. Dazai turned his attention back to the students who were busy stretching and warming up. Some of the students had already noticed his absence and started asking Chuuya questions. He can already feel the irritation from the ginger at being pestered about his well-being. It seems Chuuya's answer earned some confused gazes and giggles. Being so high up, Dazai could barely hear anything, but reading lips was a skill he picked up in the Port Mafia. Don't bother with that bastard. He has period cramps. Dazai chuckled to himself when he read Chuuya's lips. Oi, what are you doing up there? Get down here so I can beat your ass. Only Bakugo's voice could reach this high up so effortlessly. Absolute offense and absolute defense. Bullshit. Having to rely on someone else just means you're weak and lacking. I'll take both of you on together and show your stupid little hero institute that they made the wrong choice. Hey, don't wanna. Dazai shook his hands dismissively. This kid seriously has a large ego and always wants to prove he's better than everyone. That trait of his made him such an easy target to manipulate and break. What? You chickening out? Bakugo taunted. If he was Chuuya, he'd have already risen to the bait. To Dazai though, childish taunts and insults like this just slide right off him. Yeah, Dazai replied without hesitation. I admit defeat. You win. Now move along and taunt that little slug instead. Chuuya scowled at his nickname. Dazai winked in response, provoking the Chiba even more. That's when Aizawa decided to step in. That's enough, both of you. And I've already paired up everyone, so Bakugo, don't go picking fights on your own. Aizawa held up a roster where a list was already prepared. And Dazai, if you're sitting this one out, then Nakahara would have to join another group. How typical that he would group both of the transfer students together instead of splitting them up. What a convenient way of trying to gauge their strengths without endangering his students. How clever and how predictable. But isn't that just so boring, Aizawa-sensei? If what Aizawa wants is to gauge their strength, he'll gladly give it to him. My dear Chuuya there has all his frustrations pent up in that tiny body of his. He's itching for a fight right now. Put him up against multiple opponents so he can blow off some steam, will you? You want to see how strong he is, don't you? You're puzzled why your quirk doesn't work on him, aren't you? You'll certainly accept my offer now, won't you? It was obvious that Dazai was baiting the teacher. But so what? Even if he knew, he had no choice but to accept if he wanted to ensure his students' safety. Eventually, as Dazai predicted, the hero relented. Aizawa-sensei, are you sure about this? Wouldn't it be too much for the boy to handle? Toshinori seemed worried about his suggestion. All these heroes were such worrywarts and always treated them like fragile teenagers. It was even starting to annoy Dazai a little. All Might, you've seen what they could do. And Dazai's saying Nakahara can handle it. I have no reason to doubt it. This can also improve the students' teamwork. Aizawa's explanation was valid and sound, successfully dispelling Toshinori's worries. If Nakahara agrees too, then it's fine. Dazai didn't bother hiding his triumphant smile. He's sure the ginger would appreciate his efforts for letting him blow off some steam. Nakahara, Dazai suggested that you could take on multiple opponents at once. Are you all right with that? Aizawa called out, catching the students' attention. Most of the students gaped at their teacher's words, with only one exception. Why does he get special treatment? And of course only that aggressive blonde would think this is favoritism. Chuuya turned to him then rolled his eyes again when Dazai winked. But behind that irritated expression, Dazai could see the ginger's glee perfectly. He trusted him to understand his intentions without needing to convey anything. Chuuya loves to fight, especially when the odds are seemingly stacked against him. He would have this crazed smile whenever he crushes his opponents with gravity. He was a one-man army himself, and Mori often sent them for dangerous missions without any lackeys to reduce the casualties. Because what is 100 armed men compared to a single person with gravity at his very fingertips? I don't care. I'll fight them 1-on-1 or 20-to-1 any day. How he acts like he isn't excited about the fight is just so adorable. Very well, Aizawa sighed. He looks like he isn't paid enough to deal with this shit. Everyone, to your positions. I'll interfere if things go bad. Try not to kill anyone, Chibai. Dazai shouted, earning startled gazes and nervous laughter from the class. Just shut up and watch me, shitty Dazai. When Aizawa gave the signal to battle, that's when the screams started. Aizawa couldn't believe what his eyes were witnessing right now. Nothing could have prepared him for this. This moment where Nakahara was one-sidedly obliterating the entirety of Class 1A. And the worst part, he hadn't even taken his hands out of his pockets once. Some of the students with weaker support-type quirks had been incapacitated, lying on the ground unconscious but still breathing. Not only did Nakahara possess such destructive powers, he had absolute control over it, hitting them just enough that it didn't warrant the teacher's interference. Knowing this, that crazed smile on his face unsettled him even more. The only other student who would smile so widely while fighting was Bakugo, who was currently frustrated at not being able to land even a single hit on the boy. Bakugo thrived on the feeling of winning a fight, but for Nakahara, he relishes the thrill of a fight itself. The gravity manipulator was essentially toying with his students to drag out this fight. It wasn't all that bad at first. His students were holding up well and their teamwork was great. It's something they managed to develop naturally after overcoming so many crises. However, that moment shattered in a blink of an eye when Nakahara knocked out 5 students in one go. You'd think fighting 1 against 20 would at least make Nakahara feel a little nervous. But no, the teenager's posture exuded confidence. From the way he smirked with his head held high to the casual stance he took with both hands tucked into his pockets. As casual as his stance may seem, Aizawa couldn't detect even a single opening from him. After their 3-second-long stare-down, Class 1A took off. Students with offensive quirks like Midoriya, Bakugo, and Todoroki charged forward, leading the vanguard. When they were only a few steps apart, that was the moment Nakahara chose to move. And when he moved, a trail of destruction was left at his wake. Nakahara squatted, then propelled himself upwards, demolishing the ground beneath his feet. He jumped almost as high as the ceiling with the aid of his quirk, diving down like a meteor, causing a shockwave from his descent. He arrived at the rear of Class 1A in a split second, before the students at the vanguard could even react. Nakahara struck. The first of his victims was Minta. Nakahara sent the poor kid flying like a football. And if it wasn't for his quirk cushioning his head from hitting the wall, Minta would have found himself hung on the wall from his head. The next was Koda. He kicked him similarly, sending the shy kid flying and accidentally knocking into Hagakure as well. Koda lost his consciousness and Hagakure was unfortunately pinned underneath and unable to move. That was 3 down already in under 3 seconds. Bakugo arrived at the scene first, sparks going off at his palms, ready for an explosion. Don't go hiding in the rear and face us head on, you twerp, Bakugo taunted. An explosion went off right in front of Nakahara's face, but he had again leapt up to dodge the blow. Nakahara's grin turned even wider, if that was even possible, than before. Aizawa had a really bad feeling about this. Hiyarazu had been biding her time all this while and finally, she used her quirk to create a cannon. From what she had observed, she deemed it necessary to use such drastic measures on someone like Chuuya. Even if he can use gravity to stop the impact, the distraction would be enough for the others to surround him. Nakahara had his back towards her at this moment. It was a prime opportunity to strike with his back wide open. Without hesitating a second longer, she fired. Bang! Just when she thought it was going smoothly. Her blood ran cold. Chuuya had twisted his body agilely, dodging the cannonball effortlessly. But that wasn't all. Instead of just allowing it to continue its course, Chuuya decided to kick that 5 kilograms worth of lead right back. The curl of his lips was her only warning as her own creation came barreling back to her. Midoriya watched as Yaoyorozu was taken down by the weapon of her creation. The cannonball collided with her cannon, exploding on impact. Yaoyorozu, being the closest to it, was unfortunately implicated, so it covered her face as she flopped lifelessly onto the floor. Jiru had already ran forward to check on their assistant class rep, so Midoriya turned his focus back onto the chaos ahead. Kacchan was currently engaging in a fight with Chuuya. However, he had never seen his childhood friend so helpless before. Each of his punches and explosions were either blocked, dodged, or countered, and Midoriya knew. The fact that Kacchan was still able to fight wasn't because of his abilities, but rather Chuuya toying around with him. Their new transfer student was leading Kacchan on by his nose. "Kacchan, we have to fight him together or he'll take us down one by one," Midoriya shouted, regrouping with his classmates on the ground. "Shut up, Deku. I don't need you to tell me that." Kacchan launched another explosion towards Chuuya. Midoriya is painfully aware of how powerful Chuuya is. Uraraka and Ida even more so after experiencing his powers first. It was like being crushed under a mountain. "I couldn't even lift a finger or even cry out," Ida had told him in the infirmary. He could sense the fear in his friend's eyes. This was just like his experience with the hero killer, Stain, amplified by 10 times. "I felt like an ant waiting to be crushed under his gravity," Uraraka said, her usual bubbly expression nowhere to be seen. Recovery Girl had healed her, but there was still some lingering pain where her ribs had cracked. How would they even take down this monster if no one can even get near him? For now, only long-range attacks would seem to work. He needed to stall for time while he thought of a plan. Chuuya descended to the ground just then. leaving Kachin to his explosions in the sky. He can't stay up there for long, Midoriya noted. Jiru-san, he called out, hoping the girl would understand his intentions. I know. Jiru plugged her earphone jacks into the ground. Gravity couldn't deter something that doesn't have a physical form like sound waves. Jiru only needed to send a vibration through the ground towards Chuuya to throw him off balance. And when he's still busy steadying himself, they'll counter. But Midoriya had to find out just how naive his thinking was the hard way. Before Jiru could launch her attack at him, Chuuya struck first, almost like he was waiting for this moment. That familiar, deadly red sheen of his powers spread out, covering the land he stands on. Then Jiru was already lying on the ground unconscious with blood seeping out of her ears. He used her quirk against her. Midoriya realized. 5 people down and not even a minute has passed. Before anyone could even process what Chuuya did, he had already launched himself up with a piece of the ground beneath him. It was back to square one again. Using gravity, Chuuya split the block of cement into 2 and proceeded to kick it into 2 different directions. The unfortunate victims this time were Aoyama and Shoji, who had been hit square in the head and passed out immediately. It'd be a miracle if they only suffered from a concussion. That's when something jumped out of the darkness. Takoyami's dark shadow appeared behind Chuuya, and since shadows didn't have a presence, Chuuya couldn't detect it. Dark shadow wrapped itself around Chuuya, holding him in place. Caught off guard, Chuuya couldn't react for a split second, and that split second was enough. Guys, I can't hold him for long. Take him down, now. Takoyami shouted somewhere from the shadows. Midoriya used full cowl and jumped. Kachin used explosions and blasted himself off. Todoroki used ice to create a path. Uraraka used zero gravity to make herself float. Ida, Kirishima, Kaminari, Siro, Ashido, Sato and Ajiro followed behind Todoroki. With Chuuya temporarily immobilized, this was the perfect moment for them to surround him and attack all at once, as everyone prepared their ultimate move to take the gravity manipulator down. His lips twisted up ominously. Is that all? He heard the ginger mumble. Again, the same red sheen appeared around his body as he pried dark shadow's claw off his body. The sentient quirk tried to wriggle itself away from Chuuya's grip to no avail. And Chuuya's next move shouldn't have been a surprise after all the stunts he pulled, but of course, surprised they were. Still using gravity to hold onto Dark Shadow, Chuuya swung it around like a whip, pulling Takoyami out of the shadows, like swinging a baseball bat where they were currently the baseballs. Those who couldn't react quick enough were taken down. Ajiro and Sato were flung to the other end of the gymnasium, falling like a lifeless doll to the ground. Home run, he heard Dazai shout somewhere from the balcony. He was really enjoying himself, wasn't he? After using his temporary whip to do a few sweeps around, Chuuya finally released Dark Shadow. And either by pure coincidence or by Chuuya's calculations, Takoyami collided into the wall where Tsuyu had camouflaged herself. Another 2 down. Their number advantage was starting to decrease by the second. A fight that was initially an overwhelming 20-1 had dwindled to a measly 9-1. Chuuya had single-handedly taken down half of Class 1A. Man, this is like Mirio-senpai all over again. How are we supposed to take him down if we can't even touch him? Kirishima shouted with both Kaminari and Ashido in his hands. The boy managed to react in time and back off from Chuuya's devastating sweep, grabbing his friends in the process. Indeed, this was like fighting Mirio-senpai all over again, but more painful, highly destructive, and dangerously efficient, though Mirio-senpai used a shorter time to take down half the class. Chuuya wasn't even using his powers to the full extent. The gravity manipulator hasn't even used his hands for God's sake. From what Midoriya could tell, he was only using his quirk as a support rather than using it offensively. To choose to fight head-on instead of utilizing that overpowered quirk of his to immobilize everyone in one go shows Chuuya's absolute arrogance and boundless confidence in his abilities. Nakahara Chuuya is the personification of raw power itself. Deku, we need a plan. We can't go on like this. Uraraka had appeared beside him at some point. Midoriya noticed how her hands trembled subtly, which she hid behind her body. He wanted desperately to tell her he has a plan, but the fact is, each plan he envisioned was ruthlessly foiled by Chuuya's sheer power alone. He was at a loss. In no way could he see Class 1A potentially winning this fight even at full power with their gears equipped. Aw, damn it. We'll just charge in and overwhelm him together. With that, the Baka squad acted. First was Siro. He wrapped his tape around Chuuya tightly like a mummy, and to not repeat what happened previously, he cut off the tape so he wouldn't be used like a whip. Then Kirishima appeared behind with his body hardened to the core. He tackled Chuuya down, holding him in place. Even if you crush me or hit me with rubble, I won't back down. Kaminari, Ashido, now. Aye. Ashido used her acid quirk to support Kaminari and got close to where Chuuya and Kirishima were currently tangled together. Midoriya realized what they were trying to do and thought it wasn't a bad idea at all. While Kirishima and Siro's quirk were holding him down, Kaminari would use his to electrify Chuuya. It was a great plan actually, against ordinary people that is. But Nakahara Chuuya was far from ordinary. With the same crazed smile plastered on his face, he activated his quirk again, and this time he didn't hold back. Radial cracks started forming with him at the center. The cracks spread, reaching every single member of the Baka squad except Bakugo, who retreated to the air just in time. And where their feet touched the ground, they were bound by gravity too. With just a thought, gravity responded at his call, causing the ground to swallow his classmates up. When Chuuya withdrew his powers, Kirishima, Kaminari, Zero, and Ashido had their bodies buried underground, unconscious. Ada appeared then. Using the moment when Chuuya deactivated his quirk, Ada rushed forward at full speed, launching a roundhouse kick at him with the aid of his engine quirk. Yet again, Ada's lightning-fast kick couldn't even touch a strand of hair on Chuuya. Ada's leg stopped inches away from Chuuya's head, that familiar red glow enveloping it. As so heavy, this is how you do a roundhouse kick. Chuuya twisted his body, delivering a kick straight to Ada's temple. Class 1A's monitor was out cold. DIE, Kachin yelled from where he was. Using his ultimate move that had secured his victory from the UA Sports Festival, Kachin approached like a tornado. Midoriya had a feeling that the fight was near its end, so it was now or never. Plans be damned, whatever it was, it wouldn't work on Chuuya anyway. The only solution right now was to go all out and hope for the best. One for all, full cow, 15%. Todoroki followed suit, using his fire quirk to support himself. Uraraka took advantage of all the rubble caused by Chuuya's quirk and launched them towards him. It was all or nothing. He won't give up till the very end. Playtime's over. That was the last thing he heard before he experienced what it felt like to be crushed by gravity. Aizawa was discombobulated, to say the least. Watching his students passed out on the ground, some in the ground even, sent chills up his spine. Of course, Mirio had done the same just a few weeks ago, but at least his students were still conscious and able to move. Aizawa should have stopped the fight. No, fight was too vague a word to describe this situation. It was a one-sided massacre, minus the blood and gore and deaths. But if Nakahara had been a villain, he doesn't even want to entertain that possibility. This. Even Toshinori with years of experience up his sleeves found it difficult to comprehend the scene in front of him. The hands holding the balcony railings were trembling ever so slightly, his jaw hanging loose. 5 minutes and 13 seconds, Dazai called out from the balcony. You've really taken your time, huh, slug? Oh, shut up, you bastard. As if you have any right to say anything lounging up there. Nakahara finally deactivated his quirk, releasing his grip on gravity and setting the rest of the students free. The 20-1 fight ended with 15 unconscious, 1 immobilized, and 4 conscious but incapacitated. It was solely Nakahara Chuuya's win. What a devastating beauty, don't you think so? Dazai leaned against the railing, tilting his head towards them. Aizawa can see the darkness in his amber eye swirl, like something was stirring it. And a complete show-off too. Was that his full power? Aizawa went straight to the point. If the kid knows his intentions, he won't bother hiding it. He needed to know what was the extent of Nakahara's abilities should there come a time when they turned their backs on the heroes. No, Dazai said lightly, a devious grin cutting across his face. Not even close. Bakugo had never felt so thoroughly defeated before. The only other time he felt this helpless was back when he encountered that sludge villain. And what makes it that much more significant is because he's grown much stronger than before. He's positive that if he were to encounter that sludge motherfucker now, he can blow it up into pitiful slobs and send it back to where it came from. But strangely enough, he doesn't feel too bummed out about it. Sure, he's frustrated he lost, even more so when he remembers how he couldn't even land a clean hit on the ginger. Chuuya was the same age as him. And if he still lost against him with 19 other extras on his team, that just means he's not strong enough. Worse still when the shorty hadn't even used his full power. That absolute offense bullcrap wasn't just an exaggerating and cringy nickname. Bakugo can be angry at that all he wants, but reality is, Nakahara Chuuya was just too damn powerful. And that's why he's mad about another thing. Why the hell was someone as strong as him partnered with that bandaged weakling? Boy, if you're that strong, why bother hanging around that bandaged weakling? Bakugo stalked over to where Chuuya was currently tying his hair. From what he could tell, Chuuya had it all. Offense, defense, skill and technique, close range and long range. And to top it all off, that overpowered quirk of his. What use was there in teaming up with a coward who doesn't even dare to fight? You mean Dazai? Chuuya raised his eyebrows at him. I have my reasons. Speak properly and don't be vague. The ginger rolled his eyes at him, finally securing his hair into a low ponytail. Yes, I'm strong. Stronger than that mackerel by several folds actually. Chuuya's gaze flickered over to where Dazai was conversing with his teachers. But while I'm stronger than him physically and ability-wise, Dazai is far more frightening than I am. That fucking weakling. Bakugo scoffed, wondering if they were even talking about the same person. He looks like a strong breeze would blow him away. Chuuya cackled, then said, yeah, that bastard's all skin and bones. A word of advice, don't try to provoke him too much. You'll fall into his scheme before you even notice. The fuck are you trying to tell me? Dazai called out to Chuuya then, waving a water bottle in the air. He heard the ginger mutter, the bastard's acting nice, with a confused scrunch of his brows. Tell me, which is more terrifying? Chuuya suddenly asked as he made his way over to Dazai. To overwhelm your enemies with raw power alone, or defeat them without even lifting a finger. The ginger went off after shoving that question into his face, using his quirk to float himself to the second floor balcony. Dazai held the bottle towards the floating ginger, who reached out to take it skeptically. And then Dazai decided to spurt water right into Chuuya's face. Chuuya's yell echoed in the gymnasium, but Dazai wasn't done yet. He pressed a finger to the ginger's forehead. A blue glow was emitted from his fingertips that spread all over Chuuya's body, canceling out the red glow of his quirk. Without the help of his quirk, Chuuya fell down gracelessly. Luckily, he managed to activate his quirk just in time to cushion his fall. That was what prompted the cat and mouse chase around the gymnasium while more than half the class lay unconscious on the ground. Bakugu's pretty sure his teachers have already contacted Recovery Girl, so they would be safe for now. That damn nerd was going around and checking on everyone like a goody two-shoes, with icy hot and round cheeks tagging along. While looking at the destruction around him, Bakugu found himself pondering over Chuuya's words. If what he said held any truth in it, he wonders how terrifyingly powerful both Dazai and Chuuya would be if they teamed up. Man, you really did us in, bro, Kirishima drawled, his back hunched over in defeat. Couldn't you have held back a little? But I held back a lot though, Chuuya thought. Well, it's best if he doesn't startle them too much when they just met today. I won't apologize for it though, Chuuya said, eyeing all the bandages wrapped around Kirishima and Ashido. While most of the students of Class 1 had to be brought to the infirmary so Recovery Girl could heal them, only a few were allowed to leave. The rest had to stay overnight just in case. If you want someone to blame that mackerel. He set y'all up against me. Chuuya, how could you throw me under the bus like that? Dazai whined, faking a heartache. The betrayal. I will throw you directly in front of a bus if you don't quit whining, Chuuya threatened. Dazai faked hiding beside his luggage like some poor, homeless puppy. They are currently moving to the 1A's dorm where they'll be staying with their classmates. Chuuya finds it a hassle because the spare room Nezu gave them on their first night was more than enough. Plus, they didn't have to share it with 20 other teenagers who were more trouble than they signed up for. Aw, you guys have such a cute relationship, Ashido chirped. Chuuya was pretty sure the look of pure disgust and horror he gave her would give a 3-year-old recurring nightmares. And that fucking bastard has the gall to look amused while nodding his head. We are neither cute nor have a fucking relationship whatsoever, Chuuya defended. He felt like his pride was on the line here. The only thing closest to a relationship I have with this shithead is when my fist is connected to his face. Mina-chan, look at how Chuuya is always abusing me. Dazai whined again. This time he hid behind Ashido. I'm a victim of domestic violence here. There. He doesn't know what spell the mackerel put her under, but Ashido started comforting that self-proclaimed victim. If anything, Chuuya was the biggest victim for being roped into whatever bullshit that has happened because of Dazai. If he wasn't so desperate to get back home, he'd have already strangled that waste of bandages. Haha, you guys sure are an amusing bunch, Kirishima commented after a while. Kind of like Bakubro and Midoriya. Those two. What's up with them, really? They look like their ancestors have a blood feud. Haha, that's a bit extreme, bro. They just hate each other. Well, Bakubro at least. If they hate each other so much, why the nicknames? Dazai asked innocently, as if he doesn't already know everything about them. Even that little fight they had that put both of them on house arrest had already been found out by Dazai from hacking into the security footage files. Well, they're actually childhood friends, Kirishima explained. I'm not too sure, but I think Bakugu thought Midoriya was quirkless, but he actually just manifested his quirk late. That kinda started their current rivalry, I guess. I see. Dazai may seem like he was asking a harmless question, but Chuuya knew the bastard probably figured something out from the redhead's words. Conniving bastard. After a little while more of walking, they finally reached their dorm building. It was a giant 5-story tall building with the words "Wanna" plastered on top. Chuuya couldn't help but wonder how much funds UA actually have, because all the facilities he's seen are all high-end and advanced. One 5-story building like this would already cost several million yen. Even if it was built with the help of quirks, the maintenance and material costs wouldn't be cheap. Not to mention there's a dorm for each class, including general education, support, and management. Chuuya can't believe he's admitting it, but UA might just be wealthier than the Port Mafia. Welcome to our humble abode. Ashido and Kirishima opened both sides of the double doors like valets of a 5-star hotel. They were just a little behind on Dazai's dramatics. Maybe that's why they were much easier to talk to. There'd be more people welcoming you guys if they weren't in the infirmary right now, Kirishima chuckled. It was true, this large building had barely anyone. Including the both of them, there were only Todoroki, Bakugo, Kirishima, Ashido, and Hagakure, Midoriya, and Uraraka, who weren't injured much, had stayed behind to help Recovery Girl. The poor lady probably had her hands full for treating them. Not that Chuuya was sorry about it though. Todoroki had looked up from his bowl of cold soba when he heard them enter. Slurping the last of his noodles, he gave them a nod as welcome and went back eating. Yaoyorozu, Anjiro, Ida, and Sato were supposed to be on dinner duty today. Too bad they're unavailable now. Ashido heaved a sigh, rubbing a tummy like she was hungry. Okay, maybe Chuuya felt a little bad. Just a little. Oh, you guys are back. From the kitchen, he found Hagakure waving at them. At least that's what it looks like with the way her sleeves were held up. We're cooking curry right now. You want some? Huh? They can cook for themselves. I ain't sharing. Bakugo suddenly yelled from where he was stirring a big, steaming hot pot of curry. A pot big enough to feed 10 people, that is. Oh, I thought of a great idea, Ashido suddenly said, turning to the both of them with sparkly eyes. Why don't both of you be on dinner duty tonight? Since you're going to be staying here for a while, you should have your share of the chores too. Hell no. If you let that bastard anywhere near the kitchens, he'll blow up half the building in record speed. Chuuya gestured at Dazai, who was pouting and whining again, but Chuuya had gotten better at tuning his voice out. I'm sure it can't be that bad, right? Kirishima was a little skeptical at the exaggeration. But with Dazai, it's really not. This bastard racked up 5 million yen in property damages for trying to cook instant noodles. Chuuya deadpan. No fair. I just accidentally left Mori's scalpel in the microwave for a moment. And don't even ask how the bastard managed to forget putting Mori's scalpel in the microwave, because Dazai never forgets. He probably did it hoping one of the shrapnels from the explosion would hit his neck. Chuuya's a meanie. I'm ignoring you. With that, Dazai stalked over to the kitchens. Chuuya felt a weight was lifted off his shoulders and he could breathe a little better. Thank fucking Christ, he thought. Let Dazai pester someone else. Chuuya needs a break. Even if said someone is a certain angry blonde. Kachin, you can cook. How surprising. Dazai draped his arm over Bakugo's shoulder, peering over to get a good look at the pot. The fuck? Who said you could call me that? Quit it, it's disgusting. Chuuya swears his hair turned even spikier than before, like a porcupine's. Bakugo got as far away from Dazai as possible while still holding onto the ladle and stirring. Maybe letting Dazai pester a literal human TNT isn't that good of an idea. Perhaps Ashido and Kirishima had the same idea and went forward to help too. She went ahead to wash the vegetables while he worked on chopping them. As for Chuuya, he was trying to stop the brunette from throwing a whole cucumber into the curry. Hey, I'm just trying to tone down the spiciness though. Fuck, get him away from the kitchen. Bakugo yelled, but Dazai was as slippery as an eel. Just when you thought you had subdued him, he'll slip right out of your grasp. After 20 minutes of cooking, dinner was prepared. Good news, they only broke one plate. Bad news, well, hopefully the sugar doesn't taste too bad in the curry. Ashido eyed the plate of curry that looked fairly normal and delicious. While nobody was looking, Dazai decided to add a few touch-ups to their curry. Maybe it's just a new recipe Dazai's trying out, Todoroki said, innocent as ever. He scooped himself a small bowl of curry after finishing his soba because according to him, they seemed like they were having fun. Like hell it is, fucking idiot. Bakugo shot a death glare towards Dazai, who had mastered the art of ignorance. He didn't even try to look apologetic for messing with their dinner. Enough talking. Let's dig in, Ashido prompted, most likely afraid a dog fight would break out on the dining table. Itadakamasu, they all said in unison. However, before they could even take a bite out of it, the double doors to their dorm burst open, revealing a serious-looking Aizawa. His eyes snapped to them in an instant, more specifically him and Dazai. Dazai, Chuuya, I need to see both of you. Now, Aizawa was a little out of breath as he talked, like he had run all the way here from wherever he was earlier. Everyone was looking at them with curious gazes. Even Chuuya can't think of the reason Aizawa was acting so frantic right now. He didn't accidentally kill one of the students, right? When Dazai walked past him towards where their teacher was, Chuuya caught the knowing smile on his face. Fuck, the bastard already knew, and didn't think to tell him. Hiratsu Ryuru wanted nothing more than to have a drink and a nice, long smoke right now. He hadn't had much time to indulge himself ever since Mori gave him the task of overlooking the two teenagers the boss had taken in. The two were troublemakers to the core. The fact that one possesses godly powers and the other demonic intellect doesn't make it any better. He had naively thought if those two weren't around, he'd finally catch a break. But now that they had actually disappeared, like a magician had poofed them out of existence, Hiratsu can already feel the migraine assaulting his mind from having to clean up this mess. Sir, what should we do with them? A henchman came up to ask. Hiratsu casts a glance where two petrified teenagers were tied up and gagged. They wore the same gray jacket and red ties, like a school uniform of some sort. Not any schools around Yokohama that he remembered. The two teenagers, a boy and a girl, had paled to a serious degree with two guns aimed at their heads. Hiratsu doesn't know what's going on, and the two teenagers seem to be in the same boat as him. But when Port Mafia's strongest soldier and demon prodigy disappear simultaneously, this matter isn't one to be taken lightly. For all Hiratsu knew, this might be an attack to decrease the Port Mafia's influence. With the notorious Saokoku out of the picture, it was enough to lure enemy organizations to launch an attack on them. A car engine rumbled just outside the abandoned warehouse then. The Port Mafia's signature black sedan with its tinted windows appeared behind Hiratsu. Only two types of people in the Port Mafia would use this ride: the executives and the boss himself. Two henchmen went forward dutifully to open the car door. Before the person occupying the vehicle even came into view, every single one of the Port Mafia's men that were present got down on one knee with their head bowed. The Mafia prioritized hierarchy over anything else. It's the first lesson that's been ingrained into their minds ever since they joined. What a mess, came the voice of none other than the boss himself, Mori Aogai. The scene was still covered in blood and gore where the Mafia members had shot down every last one of this illegal drug ring operating without the Mafia's consent. Rise. Only when they heard the permission to lift their heads did the Mafia members stand. They stood at attention, their arms behind their body as they waited for further orders. Hiratsu followed suit, his head bowed a little when facing Mori and Chuuya, who had followed along. Mori was wearing his usual Mafia black suit with a blood-red scarf draped over his neck, the very picture of a boss himself. As for Chuuya, she donned her usual pink kimono with red spider lilies patterns at the hem of her skirt. And were those blotches of scarlet blood or part of her kimono? You are not to speak unless spoken to, the second lesson they learned. Hence Hiratsu kept quiet as he waited for Mori to speak. Explain, Hiratsu. Yes, boss. Given permission to speak, Hiratsu started explaining as best as he could. He told Mori how their ambush went, then how Dazai and Chuuya disappeared when a bright light shone. After that, two random teenagers took their place, lying unconscious on the ground. These were on them when we did a body check of them. Hiratsu handed over the student cards he confiscated earlier. Mori took it, walking past him towards the two tied-up teenagers. The guns that had been trained on them had been removed ever since the boss arrived. As ironic as it may be, Mori dislikes the sight of guns whenever he's around. And with the source of their fear gone, the students no longer had the petrified expression on their faces. A defiant look had taken its place instead. It's quite humorous actually, because they should fear Mori more if they even knew an inkling about who he was. Sayuki Chiho and Matsumoto Shinji. Enter from UA. Mori asked with a raise of his brow. Clearly, even he had not heard of a school like this before in Yokohama. Unless the school isn't in Yokohama. The two tried speaking, but with their mouths gagged, hardly any words could be heard. Take off their gags, you villains. The boy immediately shouted as soon as he was free. UA will not stand for this. When the heroes find us, they'll capture you and put you behind bars for the rest of your lives. The boy had amazing tenacity despite being surrounded by so many men armed with guns. They must be really confident that they won't be shot where they stand. And who were these heroes they were threatening them with? Not even the government gave their lackeys such a tacky title in the name of justice. Boy, who gave you the right to raise your voice? Came Chuuya's sharp and chilly voice. She had her katana aimed at Matsumoto's neck, close enough to draw blood. Remember that we only need one prisoner to question. The boy shut up immediately, whimpering like a cornered rat. His previous bravery melted into nothing. It's all right, Chuuya don't know. Mori lifted his hand and Chuuya obeyed, sheathing her katana back into the umbrella where she first drew it. They're just a little shaken is all. We just have a few questions for the both of you. Who are you affiliated with and where are my two subordinates? The pair gritted their teeth but showed no signs of answering. The third lesson, always obey the boss's commands. Not speaking I see. Mori frowned a little. That wasn't a good sign. I don't know, nor do I care, what fantasy world you've been living in until now. You will talk one way or another. Whether you speak willingly or we make you speak, it's up for you to decide. And I can assure you that no heroes are going to come to your rescue. You are under the Port Mafia's mercy so long as you continue to stay in our territory. Mori's words seemed to have an effect on the teenagers, their complexion turning paler at the mention that no one would come to save them. Not even government authorities would dare meddle in the Mafia's matters unless they were prepared to face the consequences. The only way out for them is to fess up, or they will die if they prove useless in aiding the Mafia's goal. Lock them up in the Mafia's headquarters, Mori commanded as he walked back towards the car after saying what needed to be said. Now, he only needed to wait for his subordinates to show him the results. And Chuuya don't know, I know you're itching to question them yourself, but you have a mission in France. I won't tolerate any mishaps because you got distracted on your mission. I promise you will find Chuuya and Dazai. Don't worry, boss. I won't disappoint. And I thank you for your reassurance. Chuuya bowed her head subserviently. Hiratsu noticed how her grip tightened around the hilt of her umbrella. It's known to everyone in the Mafia how Chuuya has a soft spot for Nakahara Chuuya. It's only rational that she would react like this when one of her favorite subordinates went missing. And Hiratsu, use whatever means necessary to find out everything about them. Mori stopped beside him. Hiratsu could feel the waves of eerie darkness emanating from the man. While he may seem nonchalant on the outside, Hiratsu knew Mori was very serious about the disappearance of both Dazai and Chuuya, especially when they're prime candidates for the executive position. I expect a report on my desk by noon tomorrow. Yes, boss. And who will be conducting the questioning? I have just the perfect person, Mori said with a slight twist of his lips, handing over a matchbox to him. You can find the man here and bring him in. The sight of the moon was much clearer on the rooftop. It was a full moon tonight. Dazai wonders if the night sky in Yokohama was the same as Musutafu, or would it be dyed in red like always? Chuuya's head popped up from the ledge of the roof then. The hell, where did you get all this booze from? Dazai threw one of the unopened cans of beer towards Chuuya, who caught it deftly. There's a total of 10 cans, enough for both of them to share. Let's just say Toshinori isn't that bright of a man, Dazai explained crudely. It really wasn't all that difficult to sneak some of these bad boys in when the retired pro hero didn't even try to check. Props to Dazai's amazing hiding abilities. When Chuuya popped open the can of beer, foam started bubbling out and splashed all over the ground. Dazai cackled. How naive of the slug to not predict that he would tamper with it. Chuuya never learns. And Dazai too, for that matter. So caught up in laughing, he didn't notice when Chuuya hurled the can towards his head, leaving a bright red mark where it hit his forehead. If Chuuya had used his ability to manipulate it, Dazai would be considered lucky if only his skull cracked. Ouch, Chuuya, that hurts. TCH, it better. Well, now there were 9 cans of beer left. Chuuya stalked over, sitting on the ledge of the roof with one foot dangling beside Dazai. He popped open another, untampered can of beer and gulped down its contents in a matter of seconds. This tastes like shit. While I apologize for not being able to cater to your expensive taste, Chibai, Dazai said sarcastically. But this was the only store I managed to find that didn't give a shit if I was a minor. Already, the Chibai's face turned rosy from the alcohol. It was so obvious he was such a lightweight. Yet still he continues to deny it for his love of booze. Dazai couldn't count how many times Chuuya had drank himself drunk and proceeded to do drunk people activities. They sat in comfortable silence with only the soft clinking of empty cans to accompany them as the night passed. Eventually, Chuuya was the one to break the silence. Did you already know? Chuuya didn't elaborate after that, but Dazai knew what he was talking about. It was only 2 hours ago when they returned from the conference room where Nezu had broken the news that 2 of the UA students had disappeared without a trace the same day they appeared. Even a baby could deduce the connection between these 2 cases. I had a hunch, though I didn't have enough evidence to confirm it, Dazai explained lightly, finishing his second can of beer. Mori's knowledge of them being in the future played a big part in his deduction. The UA staff helped him confirm it. The nature of their arrival 200 years into the future isn't something as simple as being transported for no good reason. They had swapped places with 2 other people, and you didn't think to tell me. Chuuya mumbled. His expression was locked in a frustrated frown. If the atmosphere had been any less somber, Dazai would tease him about having wrinkles by the time he turns 20. Don't keep me in the dark about things like this next time, Dazai. We're in this together, I have a right to know too. Chuuya said aloud, his stance clear. Understood, Dazai hummed. It was the most Chuuya could draw out from Dazai, so he dropped the subject completely. Anyway, when are we going to that place? By that place, Chuuya meant the coordinates that Mori left for them. Are we even going to mention it to the heroes? No, Chuuya, we can't have them ransacking the place without us there. We'll have to find a way to go there ourselves. This was the only piece of clue Mori had left for them. They couldn't risk losing it. And Dazai reckons even if this location was accidentally leaked to the teachers, Mori wouldn't be so simple as to leave it in such an obvious way that others could find it. That said, it's better to be safe than sorry. And I have to warn you, Chuuya, there's a possibility that this coordinate will lead us to a dead end after so many years. If that happens, I need you to be prepared for the fact that we might never return. They both locked gazes, Dazai's expression extremely serious for once. Dazai had calculated every possibility of their return. And frankly, the chance of them not returning at all isn't low. And if that happens, they'll have to be stuck here for the rest of their lives, 200 years ahead of their timeline. I know, I can't say I'm prepared to not see anyone ever again. But I know, and if that time comes, I'll accept it however I can. 2 people stranded in a world 200 years in the future. If this had been a soap opera, how romantic that would be. Let's say that actually happens. Chuuya, Dazai started, resting his head on his knees while looking at Chuuya, his face bathed in moonlight. Even the moon shone brighter when reflected through his cerulean blue eyes. What do you say we rebuild the Port Mafia, both you and I? I'll be sure to make you my right-hand man. Rebuild the Port Mafia. That's nice. Chuuya used his ability to balance the empty can on his fingertips, leaning back on his arms. Wait, why am I the right-hand man? Why do you get to decide who's boss? Was that really a question? It's painfully obvious who's the smarter one between us, Chibai, Dazai said in a haughty tone. And as much as it irks him to admit it, he was very similar to Mori, who views benefits over all else. Of course Dazai would be the better boss than Mori will ever be, that's for certain. TCH, arrogant bastard. Dazai snickered. Since Chuuya didn't refute it, it technically means he admitted to being the dumber one between the two of them. They fell into comfortable silence yet again, watching as the night passed quietly. Classes were cancelled the following day considering Chuuya sent half the class in the infirmary. They didn't need to worry about oversleeping and missing classes. Dazai can't believe he only had to worry about getting detention if he skipped classes. It was so normal. In the Mafia, being late could cost someone their life. I'll have to pester Mori into promoting us to executives when we get back. This is too much work. Dazai whined. Yet the only response he got was a soft thud on his shoulder. Surprised, Dazai turned around to find Chuuya leaning his forehead on his shoulder. The Chibai's rhythmic breathing tells him that Chuuya has fallen asleep. Guess he chose to be a quiet drunk today. Dazai felt the tips of his lips lifting up, a different type of smile from his usual fake ones, one he wasn't accustomed to. I promise I'll find a way for us to return, Chuuya. With the Chibai sound asleep, Dazai took this chance to ruffle the ginger's hair. Why the hell did you agree to do this? Chuuya grumbled, holding a long list of items they were tasked to buy by their classmates. They've bought roughly half of everything already, but Chuuya was running out of hand space to carry them. And why do I have to tag along? Because, Chuuya, it's the price we have to pay for not taking part in the school festival, Dazai said matter-of-factly, rolling his eyes as if it wasn't already obvious. Aizawa had announced yesterday that UAS school festival will be held in 2 weeks' time, so everyone was busy preparing for it. The school was physically vibrating from all the excitement coursing through the students. Dazai and Chuuya, though, they couldn't care less about it. Dazai knows that Chuuya would rather return before having to witness the school festival play out. But he knows it wouldn't be that simple. Until now, the rat principal hadn't given them any indication that their investigations had any progress, which was concerning. If whoever transported them here is back in their timeline, that would put Dazai in a passive position. He had no choice but to wait and hope Mori finds a solution to bring them back. And while Dazai knows Mori is competent and efficient in his tasks, the idea of hoping that Mori will save them irks him. At that point, he'd rather die. The only clue they have at this moment is the coordinate Mori left them. But he can't guarantee that the heroes will allow them to explore without interfering. He needs something to ensure that the heroes won't pointlessly meddle in. Dazai needs leverage, and that's why he's here to find it. They continued their shopping spree for a moment, crossing off the items on their list once in a while. Yaoyorozu had given them the class funds to do their shopping, which was enough to buy themselves a luxury suite at a high-end hotel. UA people sure are rich, the type of clients Mori would have treasured. Too bad they don't deal in drugs or firearms or assassinations. Chuuya, take these. Dazai dumped all his share of the items onto Chuuya without warning. The ginger had difficulty steadying himself while still trying to balance everything on both of his otherwise occupied hands. I'm having an emergency. My bladder is going to burst. Hey, stop right there, you fuck. Dazai scurried off without looking back, ducking into a narrow alleyway. It was darker than usual, being surrounded by towering brick walls despite it being mid-morning. There was less sunlight, less people, and even fewer heroes here. Since it was the weekend, Dazai spotted quite a number of heroes patrolling the city, all wearing their ridiculous spandex suits with vibrant colors as if announcing their presence to the masses. It really makes him wonder if their hero costumes were just decorations for fans to recognize them, or do they actually serve to aid their quirk. It seems to him that the heroes care more about publicity than safety. Dazai wonders how traumatized the civilians would be if he puts a bullet through their otherwise unprotected skull. He twisted and turned randomly without a destination in mind, burrowing deeper into the maze of alleyways. This is a desolate part of the city, where Dazai couldn't even detect a single presence. He continued walking on without slowing down, like he had a destination in mind. Then he turned right into a dead end. Oops, I think I'm lost, Dazai mumbled. Then 2 sets of footsteps were heard behind him, halting just at the opening of the alley, barricading him. Hey, do you guys know the way out? I'm new here, so I'm a bit lost, Dazai said, turning to face the 2 strangers with a pleasant smile. One was a girl his age, wearing a summer school uniform. The other was a guy with hideous burnt marks covering half his face, staples holding his peeling skin together. Ouch, those look like they hurt. Hey, Dabai-kun. You think he has scars like you do under all those bandages? The girl tugged on the guy's sleeve, pointing at Dazai with a dagger that had somehow magically appeared in her hand. Shut up, Toga. The guy shoved off the girl's insistent tugging, returning his hands into the pocket of his coat, casting a bored gaze towards Dazai. His eyes were a striking cerulean blue too, much like Chuuya's. Dazai stared at them the same way, his pleasant smile still plastered on his face, completely unalarmed at being surrounded by two sketchy-looking people, Toga Himeko and Dabai, two infamous members of the League of Villains. Ask anyone in the city if they know them and everyone will shrink away while saying yes. And right now, Dazai was trapped with no escape. Or at least that's what they think. Dazai didn't come all the way to lurk around the streets of their supposed base only to wind up lost. Are you guys trying to mug me? Is that what this is? Oh, you guys know that's bad, right? Dazai wiggled his finger in a no-no gesture like a goody two-shoes. Though you guys do look like you need a buck or two. Dabai scoffed, scratching his head in a lazy manner before turning back to glare at Dazai this time. You're a lot more annoying than Toga, huh? Hey, that's rude, Dabai-kun. You're awfully relaxed despite being surrounded by the League of Villains, kid. A third voice appeared then from behind the two of them. Dabai and Toga parted a little to let the newcomer through. Tattered clothing, hunched back, a severed hand covering his face, and, even from afar, Dazai can see his skin was extremely dry, to the point of being flaky even. Yikes, why should I be scared? Dazai's tone was what Chuuya would call an asking for a beating tone. Well, Chuuya was absolutely right about that. Man looked like he wanted to rip Dazai apart with his bare hands. How intense those crimson eyes are. Dazai wonders if it'll glow the same shade as his blood when he gouges them out. You're pretty cocky for a transfer brat. Makes me want to kill you, Shigaraki threatened, picking at the dry skin on his neck. Dazai's brows raised for a moment before returning to normal. His pleasant smile morphed into a knowing one. Chuuya would say it's the smile he has whenever he successfully extracted information from their prisoners. Change of plans. Tamura-kun. Let me stab him first, pretty please. Toga pleaded like a little girl pleading for ice cream. Shigaraki looked like he wanted to say something, but before he could, Toga had already pounced forward with her dagger drawn. In a split second, Toga had appeared right in front of him before he could even blink, her dagger aiming for his right bandaged eye with a gleeful smile on her face. Then, Dazai sidestepped when the dagger was only inches away. As dangerous as he was being outnumbered 3-1, Dazai wasn't going to let this opportunity to even his odds slip by. With one arm, he hooked it around Toga's outstretched arm, locking it into place. With his other arm, Dazai struck the back of her elbow, disarming her at the same time. The cracking of bones were unmistakable in the quiet alleyway. And if that weren't obvious enough, Toga's scream was enough of an explanation. But Dazai didn't just stop there. Before anyone could react to what he did, he caught the dagger she dropped and stabbed it right into her thigh. An agonizing shriek tore through Toga's throat, reverberating throughout the alleyway. She crumpled to the floor, trembling as blood pooled beneath her. You're loud. Quiet down, will you? All his life, he'd been surrounded by flames. Even when he was young, his blue flames would trail after him like a clingy friend. Even when his life was burning up in flames, it never left him like a faithful companion. Even if it was the very being that was scorching him alive. At least he never had to experience how cold the night was when he ran away from home. For the first time ever, Dabai felt chills crawl up his spine. He was still thinking about how to clean up Toga's mess when she collapsed into a pool of her own blood. With a broken arm and her thigh stabbed straight through. He was so focused on processing what was going on he didn't even register her anguished cries. It was the perpetrator's cold and detached voice that brought him back to reality. His body moved before he could even think. Bright, blue flames shot out of his palms, filling up the entirety of the alleyway. It was only a beat later when he remembered Toga was still there that he put out his flames. What he expected to see were the scorched bodies of Toga and the bandaged boy, but what greeted him instead was the silver sheen of a blade. Cutting right past his cheeks, too close for comfort, there stood the bandaged boy in pristine condition. Not even a strand of his hair singed or the hem of his coat seared. How the fuck? What the fuck is going on? This is different from what I've heard. Shigaraki seethed beside him, his knuckles cracking like he was itching to disintegrate something. For once, Dabai shared the same sentiments as his childlike boss. The intel they got stated that 2 students from a private hero institute situated in Yokohama had transferred to UA. One who could nullify quirks and the other who could manipulate gravity. One with a lanky figure and all bandaged up while the other had ginger hair and was shorter than normal. Dazai Osamu and Nakahara Chuuya. If Dabai remembered correctly, it was the latter they had to be wary of. The gravity manipulator who took out all 20 students of Class 1A. Nothing was said about the flimsy brunette. Oi, your comrade is still here, you know. Are you trying to burn her alive? The brunette, Dazai Osamu, said, spinning a dagger with the tip of his finger. Those were Toga's daggers, Dabai noted. Did he swipe them off her when his flames had engulfed them? When Dabai glared at Dazai this time, he felt something distinctly different about him. He couldn't point out what exactly, just that the air around Dazai unsettled him greatly. That soul amber eye of his had an eerie feeling to it, pricking up all his senses, sending them high on alert. Dabai felt like he was facing a predator where he was the prey, backed into a corner with no means of escaping. A feeling he hasn't felt in a long time after he decided to become the monster he was made to be. Haha, you're one to talk after stabbing her. Dazai laughed in an effort to mask his anxiety. Shigaraki didn't charge in recklessly either, but he could feel the rage rolling off his boss. You heroes are nothing but a bunch of hypocrites. Isn't that a legitimate form of self-defense though? She was the one coming at me with a knife. Dazai gestured to the crumpled form of Toga, who had recovered slightly from the pain. That familiar, menacing smile on her face had long since faded away, replaced by a tear-streaked face instead. Don't you agree, Himiko-chan? Dazai used her dagger to tilt her face up so she was looking at him. You're a big meanie, Toga managed to choke out, sniffling like a helpless lamb. Dazai chuckled, letting her face drop before turning his attention back to them. Twirling the dagger with his fingers, he walked towards them in confident strides, his posture as relaxed as when they first met him. Just who are you really? The Dazai Osamu they got from their intel was drastically different from this Dazai Osamu in front of them. Even the intel about his nullifying quirk was different. They were told his quirk worked similarly to Aizawa's, except it was through touch. It wasn't mentioned that he could nullify the quirk itself without touching the user. He was practically invulnerable if no quirks could work on him. It was wrong for them to be more wary of Nakahara Chuuya because of his overpowered quirk when really, they should have been more cautious that their quirk wouldn't work on Dazai Osamu. You guys are the one who trapped me here. Shouldn't you know? His lilt tone is what infuriates them the most. How he acts like he couldn't care less even when Japan's most wanted villains were standing right in front of him. Shigaraki moved the same time he did, flames dancing out of his palms. He already knows quirks won't work on Dazai as he demonstrated earlier, but that wasn't his goal. It only served as a distraction, to buy time for Shigaraki to get into Dazai's blind spot. He heard Dazai's exhale first, then a strangled cry tore through. Deactivating his quirk, Dazai only found the kneeling figure of Shigaraki on the ground, clutching at the side of his torso that was dripping blood. Dazai was gone. A thud. Then Dazai felt himself losing balance, tumbling backwards, the back of his head hitting gravel. Shit, what the fuck was going on? You fucking brat. Shigaraki pressed his free hand on the ground, cracks already forming on the ground as he activated his quirk. That's when Dazai appeared and delivered a kick straight to his face. That crusty hand covering his face dropped to the ground, leaving a growing red mark on his cheek. Shigaraki's quirk deactivated through that brief contact, the spreading cracks coming to an end. You can't do that, Tamura-kun. You'll bury your comrades alive if the buildings collapse, you know. The dagger was dripping with blood from where he had cut Shigaraki. Dazai turned and looked down at him, his gaze bored like this whole exchange wasn't even worth his time. Dazai felt the pit of fury in him boil over at Dazai's arrogant way of looking at him. It reminded him of someone unpleasant. He's going to burn this brat alive. Consequences be damned. All his life he could feel the hot flame of his quirk tickling beneath his skin. That feeling disappeared altogether when Dazai grabbed his face without warning. Try as he might, Dazai could not pry Dazai's fingers away. His grip was unyielding, his fingers digging deep into his cheekbones. A stinging pain spread across his face from the staples being embedded deep into his flesh. Blood trickled down his jaw. But the pain he felt was only secondary to the blooming instinctive fear that was rooted deep in the recesses of his mind he had long thought vanished. They say the eyes are the windows to the soul. If that were true, then Dazai Osamu does not have one. Those empty eyes of his was a void. It held no emotions, no feelings, nothing. Then Dazai pulled out a gun from his coat and aimed it straight at Shigaraki's head. I've heard a lot about you guys from the news, but seeing you in person, it's quite disappointing. If looks could kill, Dazai would have died a few times over from how Shigaraki was glaring at him. But with a literal gun trained on his head, his boss couldn't do much about it. A playful, immature schoolgirl, your supposed leader who has the mentality of a 3-year-old, Dazai continued. Toga managed to sit up after a while, though she was in no condition to fight, much less free them from this demon's hold. And you, with such a vengeful spirit residing inside, such a ragtag bunch of you lowlifes wants to overthrow this rotten hero society. How laughable. Dazai was starting to get confused about this whole situation. Dazai's words don't sound like he's satisfied with this societal system the heroes have established. In fact, it sounded like he loathes it. Dazai looks nothing like a hero. No hero would move as ruthlessly as he did. He looked more like a demon than a villain even. It's all because of you hypocrites who's always preaching about saving lives and defeating evil that shunned away people like us, Shigaraki gritted out. We'll demolish this fucked up system and reign as the symbol of fear when we kill All Might. And then what? After you completely upend this hero society that you so despised, what are you going to do then? What? See, you don't even know what the hell you're going to do after. Your petty goals are superficial at best. In the end, you're just going to reign over everyone with fear until someone's brave enough to stand up and start a revolution. And then the whole thing will repeat again in a never-ending cycle. Symbol of fear, you say? Bullshit. The only symbol all of you would be is the symbol of failure. Dazai had no idea why they were having this conversation with a kid. Was he trying to buy time? Did he inform the heroes and they were coming right this moment? But he had to admit, each of his words delivered a fatal strike to their convictions. Shigaraki scoffed. Kill us then. If you do, you'll be worshipped as the hero who defeated evil. Isn't that what you heroes love? Go ahead, then. But you'll always live with our blood on your hands. And you'll always be no better than a murderer. As long as Sensei is alive, the League of Villains will always rise back up. A beat. Then, completely out of his expectations, Dazai burst out laughing. He laughed so hard Dazai wondered if he was going to dislocate his jaw. Kill you? I have no problem doing that. Did you think the act of killing would haunt me for the rest of my life? How ridiculous. I mean, would you feel guilt from stepping on an ant? His smile was a vicious thing, curved like the scythe of a grim reaper's, its sharp edge breathing down your neck. But you see, as worthless as you may be, you're not entirely useless. I don't like to discard my cards so easily. Plus, Dazai pulled the trigger. The gaping hole between Shigaraki's eyes was nowhere to be found. Dazai felt his heart skip a beat, then started pumping ferociously. I'm out of bullets, sadly. So while I commend your effort to die so willingly, I'll have to disappoint you, unfortunately. Dazai twirled his pistol around his finger before tucking it back into his coat, hidden from view. He also released his grip around Dazai's face, allowing him to breathe. It's a shame we weren't able to have a more intimate conversation, but I've been gone for a bit too long. My dog might start barking. Anyway, Dazai-kun, I'll leave them to you. Though I did avoid Himiko-chan's arteries and Tamura-kun's organs. There's no guarantee they won't bleed out if they aren't treated in time. Well then, toodles. With that being said, Dazai skipped out the alleyway and vanished from their sight. Dazai couldn't find it in himself to get mad. He only felt relieved that Dazai was gone. If word were to spread that the LOV had almost been wiped out by a single kid, no one would take them seriously. Because who would even believe that a scrawny kid like Dazai would be able to take out the villain organization that had been a headache to the hero society? If that were to happen, not only would the LOV be a laughingstock, even the hero's eligibility would be questioned. Fuck, how the hell am I supposed to carry them back? Dazai muttered. The first thing Chuuya thought when he saw Dazai emerge from around the corner was to bash his face in and be convicted for assault. The second thing he thought of was to push him into oncoming traffic and be convicted for manslaughter. Where the hell have you be? Chuuya yelled, drawing the pedestrian's attention. But right now, he couldn't care less. He stopped short, noticing the smidge of crimson on his bandages. You're bleeding. Oh, this. Dazai raised his hand, rubbing over the red spot a few times, causing the blood to smear. It's not my blood. Somehow that's even more concerning. So, care to tell me where the hell you were? It's been 15 minutes. Chuuya huffed, exasperation leaking into his tone. This wasn't the first time Dazai left him stranded and clueless out of the blue. They were supposed to be partners. He'd like if Dazai included him more in his endeavors instead of just leaving him to find out for himself. Is Chuuya worried? Dazai batted. Yes, he batted, his eyes, leaning his face forward like he was waiting for an answer. Like hell I am. Chuuya shoved the mackerel's face away, dropping half of the items they bought for their class's festival preparation. I'm hurt, Chuuya. To think you wouldn't even care about your dear partner's well-being. Chuuya seriously contemplated his previous two options. Let's talk somewhere more private. I'll fill you in on my fortuitous encounter. Chuuya sighed. At least Dazai was telling him stuff now rather than keeping it in the dark. Fine. Something weird happened earlier too when you disappeared. It was way past noon already, and Chuuya only had an omelet for breakfast. He's famished. They walked past a few stores before entering a seafood restaurant. There weren't many customers inside, so they didn't have to worry about anyone eavesdropping. Still, they chose a booth at the far corner just in case. 2 sets of king crabs and a sashimi platter. Thanks, he told the waiter. Since Mori left them some money, it would be a waste to not use them. Chuuya doesn't know how Mori had kept this account alive even after 2 whole centuries, but he wasn't one to question the methods of his boss. Wow, Chuuya's splurging today. Dazai took a seat across from him, having a view of the front door. I'll have to tell Mori how you're abusing his bank account. Shut up, dickhead. I'll tell Mori to deduct it from your salary for all the headaches you've caused me. It didn't take long for their food to arrive. 2 large king crabs steamed to perfection paired with an assortment of sashimis. While I appreciate the effort, Shibai, I prefer canned crabs more, Dazai said in a haughty tone. He's seriously a bastard through and through. You only like canned crabs cause you're too fucking lazy to peel it yourself. Chuuya cracked apart one of the crab legs and started peeling its skin off with the help of a pair of scissors. So, feel like talking now. You go first. Fine, whatever. He gave the freshly peeled crab leg to Dazai, then started peeling another. When you left, I felt someone watching me. I wandered around the block, but they didn't show themselves, only observing from afar. They left shortly before you appeared. As Dazai munched on his crab leg, Chuuya observed him closely. He's certain the mackerel knows something. Okay, my turn. I bumped into the LOV earlier. What? Chuuya almost threw his crab leg at him. Some of the patrons were startled by his voice and tried to see what's going on. Calming himself, Chuuya steadied his breathing and asked again. What the fuck do you mean you bumped into the LOV? How many of them were there? How did you even escape? Slow down, Chuuya. I'm reaching that part. Dazai reached over to pick a slice of sashimi. There are only 3 of them, so I suspect the one following you is one of the LOV too. And you just faced off against the 3 of them. You could have at least called for me. Is Chuuya getting worried? Of course I am, you idiot, Chuuya said without thinking. A flash of surprise crossed Dazai's face, too brief for Chuuya to catch. At first I was just trying to accidentally bump into them, but it felt like they already knew I was there and were waiting for me. I'm 80% sure they would have tried to split us up if I hadn't done it myself. That doesn't even make sense. How would they know who we are? They shouldn't even know that unless, exactly what you're thinking. Chibai, Dazai slurped up the last of his crab meat, his lips twisted up into a devious smile. It's Dazai's scheming smile, and Chuuya absolutely hates it. It never bode well for him or his enemies whenever Dazai had that look. We've got a traitor on our hands. One of our dear classmates is a double agent. Chuuya frowned. Why not the teachers? They know our identities too and they have better access to UAS information. Because they called me a transfer, Dazai hummed, recounting his story. If it were the teachers who know of our true identities, they would less likely withhold the fact that we're time travelers. But I think they truly believed we transferred to UA from Yokohama. And if they were lying, I would be able to see through it. He didn't doubt Dazai's ability to spot a liar, with him being the biggest pathological liar there is. I guess we can cross off those 3 who saw us then. Yup, they're good at keeping secrets. That's for sure. Dazai finally finished his crab, all thanks to Chuuya being the decent person he is, helping the mackerel peel all his crab shell. At least he was eating now. His face seemed a little fuller than before. I was going to strike an agreement with the LOV as backup, but I'll have to rewrite my plans. Personally, Chuuya doesn't like the idea of striking a deal with the LOV. He has a feeling he wouldn't get along with any of them at all. Worst case, he might just crush them all. Are we going to uncover who the spy is? Dazai nodded, an expression of glee on his face. That's Dazai's favorite job for sure, uncovering spies and exposing people. Then he gets to torture them for information and make them confess. Yup, I'll need your cooperation for that, Chibai. I'm going to have to dig up some proof. How rare for Dazai to ask for help. At least he wasn't excluding him from his plans. That's an improvement, Chuuya supposes. HMPH, like you have to ask. Dazai flashed a toothy grin at him. I knew I could count on Chuuya. Chuuya rolled his eyes, averting his gaze from the brunette. For a long time, Chuuya had always been the one to rely on Dazai. Whether because of his ability when using corruption or just in general, he always felt like he was relying too much on Dazai. His wits, to be specific, and the trust they had for each other to understand and predict the other's actions. It felt nice to know Dazai had also been relying on Chuuya. By the way, Chuuya, if we ever get to the point of rebuilding the port mafia, let's eliminate the LOV first. They'll be a nuisance to our organization, Dazai said offhandedly. Sure, Chuuya replied without looking up. He observed Dazai's face as he rang for the bill. The mackerel had fished out his new phone and started playing games on it. Seeing how nonchalant he was, Chuuya didn't see a need to worry about how they were going to find the traitor. As much as he'd hate to admit it, Dazai was his best assurance in their predicament right now. If anything, he's the best possible person to be stuck with 200 years into the future, his insufferable asshole personality aside. There's a reason why Dazai's called the demon prodigy after all. A black sedan with tinted windows rolled up in front of a building. No, a skyscraper would be a more apt way of describing it, so tall it disappears into the clouds. A man dressed in a standard black suit with black shades hurried forward, opening the car door like a well-practiced valet. The woman that emerged casts a stark contrast to the surrounding shades of black, like a rose that bloomed in a bush of wild grass. She was someone who demands attention wherever she goes, her presence unignorable. From her cherry red hair to her nails painted in a deep crimson hue, everything about her was striking. There was a regal grace in the way she held herself, almost like royalty. Red was undoubtedly her color, and like roses, she has thorns too. Kuyuazaki isn't one to mess with. Kuyu looked up. The Port Mafia's headquarters were as imposing as ever as it stared down its beloved city, Yokohama. The man who was overseeing this city of theirs was on the top floor, and Kuyu was going to meet this man. She strided over, umbrella in hand, her heels making a satisfying click-clack every time she landed. Everywhere, you could see people wearing the same monotone black suit as what is demanded of the Port Mafia, especially low-level grunts. When she passed, everyone dipped their heads in respect and fear. Hierarchy was an important thing in the Mafia, and being an executive puts you on top of most, with the exception being the boss himself. She boarded a unique elevator with only one button, taking her straight to the top floor. Only authorized personnel had access to it, Chuuya being one of them. It took a while, but when she reached, she headed straight to the end of the corridor where 2 bodyguards flanked both sides of the large, velvet double doors. She stood in front of the double doors, waiting for permission. There was no need for her to knock. Her arrival had already been alerted the moment she stepped out of the Port Mafia's vehicle. "Come in," a voice said from inside. The 2 bodyguards pushed open the doors, closing it behind her when she entered. To her left was a large floor-to-ceiling window with Yokohama's scenery as the view. And seated on an opulent couch in the middle was none other than the boss of Port Mafia, Mori Aogai. He was watching the scene beneath him with a calculative smile, his gloved hands held together in front of him. She took a seat to his right, where a similar couch had been prepared for her. Mori had already known she was arriving. "Welcome back, Chuuya Dono," he said without taking his eyes off Yokohama. "Good to see you too, boss," she replied. She noticed a file of documents sitting on the coffee table between them. There were no labels or tags or anything to indicate its contents. "You've come back earlier than I expected." "Well, since Mori presented it to their meeting, he will bring it up eventually." "I like to be efficient," she said, her reply curt. She understood what Mori was implying. "Have you completed the task I've given you?" Back then, right before she was about to take off to France, she got a call saying Chuuya had vanished. For a second there, she feared the boy had deserted the Mafia, just as she tried to when she was younger, which led to her ex-lover's untimely demise. The Mafia doesn't take deserters lightly. Imagine her surprise when she found out he had disappeared off the face of Earth, literally, along with that godforsaken demon, Dazai Osamu. But that complicates things, because with his ability, it's impossible for any ability to affect him. There was something new at play here, something that managed to catch them unawares and steal the Port Mafia's unrivaled duo. Hell, Chuuya was worried. It sounds as ridiculous as when the feeling first washed over her. Back when Chuuya just joined the Port Mafia, Mori had put him under her care, which she was reluctant to accept. She had missions to complete, babysitting is not one of them. However, over time, the boy had started to grow on her. The way he respects her, how he's willing to learn when criticized, how he brewed her favorite cup of tea when she was feeling down, how he called her Ain-san. She found herself caring for him, a feeling she had long forgotten. What was Monsieur Voltaire's response then? Mori asked. He had been most excited to accept our proposal. The contract is signed and he has agreed to meet with us in a week from now, Chuuya reported dutifully. Excellent, Mori praised. The tip of his lips lifted a fraction higher. She's certain Mori already knows the outcome of her mission, but having her report it herself builds a basis of trust between them. Mori is a meticulous person. Each and every move of his is calculating. So when he slid the mysterious file over to her, she knew she'd passed his test. "I know you're worried about Chuuya-kun. Here are the documents that we've gathered thus far." Chuuya didn't bother to hide her eagerness when she dumped out all the contents in the file. The first thing she saw were the pictures of the 2 strange students who appeared at the same time when Dazai and Chuuya disappeared, Sayuki and Matsumoto if she remembered correctly. There wasn't much information, which was weird considering it's been a week and this is the Port Mafia who could find out your dead dog's name in less than an hour. But it was still information regardless. She took her time to scan over each paper, not missing even a tiny detail. After a while, she finally spoke up. So, they swapped places, and now both Dazai and Chuuya are in the future. Saying it out loud is even more ridiculous than reading it. Time leaping, what an absurd idea. That is what we've managed to conclude so far. Mori nodded, his eyes still fixed in a calculative gaze. A plan must be shaping itself in his mind with all the information he has right now. So this isn't an enemy attack then? She read over the report again, taking note of the part where it's mentioned they were studying in UA, a prestigious hero school. Just the name sounds pretentious. No enemy organization would come up with such a lame tactic to fool the Port Mafia, right? We can't be for certain, but it's highly unlikely, Mori explained. Abilities don't work on Dazai-kun. If this was an attempt by our enemies, he would be able to nullify them. I suspect it's the doing of someone from their world. Chuuya frowned. If that were the case, it would put them in a passive position. All they could do was wait for them to find the culprit and hopefully bring themselves back. Though she supposes she doesn't have to worry much with Dazai there. She'd be more concerned if Chuuya was there alone. Just for precaution, I spared both of their lives, even if killing one would be the wiser choice, Mori continued, this time turning over to face her. Logically speaking, we'd kill one and question the other if there were 2 prisoners. But there's a chance their counterpart won't be able to return if one of them is dead. And I'd rather not take that risk. Losing either Dazai-kun or Chuuya-kun is detrimental to the Mafia. I'd like to avoid that. Mori's reasoning was logical. This was a risk the Port Mafia could not take. The loss would simply be too great. The infamous Saokoku could not exist with one and without the other. Boss, what if I? Mori cut her off before she could finish her sentence. I appreciate your offer to help, but there is no need for you to conduct the interrogation personally. The current interrogator is doing a great job, so you don't have to step in. Chuuya suppressed her urge to ask who. She could find out about it herself. What of these 2 documents then? Chuuya asked. She squinted at the picture of 2 younger boys clipped on top. They looked even younger than Dazai and Chuuya, yet their eyes tell the tragic life they've led. Who are they? Replacements, came Mori's curt reply. Chuuya snapped her head up at Mori, who was studying her every movement. Just in time, she managed to school her expression, returning to her cool, unreadable self. Mori looked away with a small smile before explaining. I can't wait for Dazai-kun and Chuuya-kun forever. It wasn't a question. There would be no room for negotiation despite how much Chuuya wanted to protest. But that would mean she was using her emotions to judge instead of considering it on a larger scale. Mori's actions were logical. No underground organization would stay still if they discover the absence of Saokoku. The Mafia needed a new duo, and Mori has already set his sights on 2 candidates in less than a week since Saokoku's disappearance. Truly a man who puts the Mafia ahead of everything else, even if it meant discarding his favorite protege and his strongest soldier. As a person, Chuuya loathes that trait of his. As an executive, she admires Mori for it. If there's nothing else, you may leave. Mori's dismissal is final. Yes, boss, she obeyed, standing up to take her leave. Before leaving, she dipped her head in gratitude. Thank you for sharing this with me. As she walked out the room and took the elevator to the ground floor, Chuuya vowed to do everything in her power to ensure Chuuya returns, and maybe Dazai, for the sake of the Port Mafia. There was a faint scent of tobacco in the air, mingled with the bitterness of alcohol and the soft jazz music playing in the background. It creates an ambient atmosphere where Ango can relax. He had shed off his pale brown blazer and loosened his tie after an exhausting day of work consisting of virtually nothing but paperwork. His glasses were getting thicker by the week with how many words he has to squint down every day. He was taking a sip of his whiskey and savoring its taste when a familiar pair of footfalls sounded from outside, getting closer as they neared the door of Bar Lupin. He didn't need to look up to know it was Oda who walked in. The bartender served his regular patron a whiskey, turning back to continue his task of polishing all the glasses on display. From his peripheral view, Ango noticed his friend's complexion had worsened considerably. Dark eye circles, untidy stubble, messy hair, unkempt appearance. Oda was never one to focus too much on his outward appearance, but not like this. Oda looked hopeless. Been a while since we had a drink. Ango suddenly broke the silence. Yeah, Oda answered, his voice raspy like he hadn't drunk water. The silence stretched out between them, accentuating the absence of one person in this odd group of 3. Dazai had always been the talkative one among them, sharing just about any kind of story he has. If not, it would be him brainstorming about his newest method of suicide along with their input occasionally. But Dazai isn't here now. He hasn't been for the past week, same as Oda, until he showed up tonight. Ango still remembers how both he and Oda had been waiting for their friend to arrive only to have the leader of the Black Lizards group, Hiratsu Ryuru, show up. Along with his unexpected appearance, he brought unexpected news with him too. Dazai was Mia, same as Nakahara Chuuya, though not by their own volition apparently. 2 teenagers took their place instead, whom the Port Mafia had already detained for further questioning, which was also the reason why Hiratsu appeared in this inconspicuous bar they frequented. The Port Mafia needed an interrogator. Why they didn't just use their usual ones Ango didn't know. Not even Hiratsu knows, just that it was a direct order from the boss himself, and Mori's orders are absolute. Then Hiratsu slid over an old Bar Lupin exclusive matchbox on the counter. That's mine, Oda had said. I lost it some time ago. Even if Mori didn't voice it out, both of them knew what he was trying to convey. Oda will be the one to conduct the interrogation. He left that very moment without protest, leaving Ango to be anxious on his own. That was the last he saw of Oda, until today. Just what happened? Curious as he may be, Ango didn't voice out his question, even if he was worried for Dazai. Oda would speak up if he was willing to, he just had to wait. Eventually, Oda does speak up. Sorry I've been absent these days. I have a lot going on. Boss's orders. Ango hummed an acknowledgement, even if his explanation was vague. Glad to see you back. How's the investigation? Investigation, not interrogation. It's progressing. I've come to ask you for a favor actually. Ango turned to face Oda then, fully taking in just how much his friend had changed in a week. Was he even eating? The boss wants more answers, but we've extracted as much as we could already. If you don't mind, can you use your ability on this? Oda handed him a student card. Matsumoto Shinji from General Studies in UA Hero School. It was one of the teenagers the Port Mafia had recently detained, and their biggest and only clue to Dazai and Chuuya's whereabouts, even though information about them is strictly restricted in case of an ambush from enemy organizations. Ango at least knows this much. While inspecting the card, he noticed a smudge of dried blood at the edge, so that's why Oda looked so disheveled. The Port Mafia isn't famous for having mercy on their prisoners. Use your ability on this and tell me what you see. Ango obliged. He activated his ability, his irises turning white as he peered into the object's memory. Blue skies, green grass, a girl wearing a gray school uniform beside him. Sayuki Chiho most likely. 2 towering buildings with a bridge linking them together. Then he saw it. He saw her. Standing by the window a few floors above was a girl with blonde hair, staring at him. The 2 students technically. He couldn't read any expression from her face. She just stood there and stared. Ango's ability deactivated just then, pulling him back to reality. Back to the familiar ambience of Bar Lupin. Back to where Oda was looking at him with desperation in his eyes. A blonde girl, Ango said, recounting back on what he glimpsed with his ability. With shoulder-length hair, she was staring at them from a tall building. She's the only one around, so she might be the person who caused this. It was a hunch, but something in his gut screamed to him that it's the truth. Find her and this whole situation will be resolved. Are you sure? Oda asked, alarmed. More or less. That was all the confirmation Oda needed. Now I just need a name to go with it. Thanks, Ango. Oda took back the student card, gulping down the last of his whiskey, then hurrying for the door. Ango unconsciously reached out to stop his friend. Are you okay, Oda? I'm fine. Ango let go, watching as his friend ran out of the bar, his footsteps fading further and further. Wise. Oda ran. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him despite how lethargic he felt from the lack of sleep and food these days. It couldn't be helped. Seeing teenagers Dazai's age being tortured for information has that kind of effect. He had been reluctant to use violence at first, thinking the 2 students would comply when they understood the situation they were in. But kids were always stubborn. They were adamant on keeping their mouths shut, opting to glare at him hard enough to will him away. Even using threats were of no use. They somehow believed that heroes will come to save them. This All Might guy especially. Either they've been living under a rock all their lives or they genuinely believe someone would be courageous enough to challenge the Port Mafia. In the end, he chose to use the gentle approach. It worked. They narrated their story, albeit with vague and curt explanations. They revealed just enough to satisfy his curiosity without revealing any information of significance. Smart. The news of them being from the future greatly surprised him. Even Mori was intrigued when he first heard of it, his eyes glinting like he picked up something valuable. Oda had thought it would end there, that the 2 students wouldn't have to go through whatever the Mafia had in store for them should they refuse to speak. But it wasn't enough. Mori demanded more. And when Oda had refused to use violence, the original interrogation squad took over. They were as merciless as the rumors claimed them to be, zero hesitation as they wringed out information from them. He couldn't stand that sight, but he couldn't exactly disobey Mori's orders either. He had to choose. Choose Dazai, or choose 2 unknown students who weren't even from his timeline. It was natural which side Oda had chosen. Regardless, it didn't make it any less difficult. With this new information he obtained from Ango, hopefully it can stop this time. It didn't take long for him to reach the Port Mafia's headquarters, where he boarded an elevator that took him below ground. The lower floors were filled with cells, all containing the Port Mafia's prisoners that still hold some value in them. It's the only reason why they were even alive right now. Without lingering too much, he headed straight for the cell at the end. He swung open the door, light from the hallways pouring into the dark, windowless cell. 2 crumpled forms were huddled together at the far corner, their limbs chained together to prevent them from escaping. They shied away from the light after spending so long in the dark. Oda's heart ached. Maybe he should have knocked to alert them first. He didn't have time to lament over his minor mistake, squatting down in front of Matsumoto and Sayuki. The quicker he's done with this, the sooner they can be free. Sorry for disturbing you. His voice stirred them from their daze. Staying so long underground with no sunlight must have messed up their concept of time, no doubt. The only thing keeping them sane was each other's company, which Mori was gracious enough to let them keep. Before you came here, do you remember a girl staring at you? She was looking down from the window of a tall building. Blonde, shoulder-length hair, Oda recounted. A blonde girl. Matsumoto's voice was weak, barely a whisper that Oda was able to comprehend. Sayuki propped herself up from beside him. The usual plumpiness of her cheeks when Oda first saw her had vanished. She was so thin right now her cheekbones jutted out. I think I remember, she mumbled. She was interning at UA. It was her last day there if I remember correctly. Good, they were getting somewhere. What's her name? Hinako Ikika. The opportunity came quicker than Dazai had anticipated. An opportunity he intends to grasp no matter what. Ever since arriving here, it has been troublesome to do anything. From his movement to his speech, even to the people he interacted with has to be strictly considered and calculated. This isn't the Port Mafia. He was an outsider here in UA. He had to tread his path carefully. One misstep and he might lose his current freedom. If this was back in the Port Mafia, Dazai wouldn't have to worry about gathering information. They had spies for that. Mori also keeps tabs on each organization and individual he's interacted with. And by that, it means their strengths, weaknesses, connections and affiliations, their daily routines even. To the Port Mafia, Any information they've extracted and gotten a hold of is worth its weight in blood. However, it's different here. Dazai does not have the resources or connections to gather the information he needs. As such, he had to do this the old way. It's during times like this that he misses the Port Mafia especially. He'd better get promoted to executive when he returns for all the labor he's gone through. That way, he can legitimately boss Chuuya around. There's no way the Chibai can refuse a higher-up's orders then. First aid is extremely important in times of emergencies, especially during rescue emergencies. Recovery Girl's breathy voice finally brought him back to reality from the fantasy his mind had wandered to. It can be the determining factor between life and death, so it's of the utmost importance that you are able to identify the basic injuries the victims have suffered precisely. Dazai frowned a little, already knowing this class is going to be as boring as everything else. Though Chuuya seems to be listening quite attentively, makes him want to pester the Hatrak. Which, of course, is what he does. Chuuya, would you give me CPR if my life depended on it? He leaned in close to whisper into the ginger's ears, which had quite the effect with how his body froze up. Bullseye. Chuuya elbowed his ribs harshly, accidentally letting a squeak of pain escape. Zip it, shitty Dazai. He whispered, shouted. I'd no sooner burn myself on a stake than get anywhere near your slimy lips. Dazai can almost hear the screech Chuuya would let out if he were a cat. He noted how the Hatrak's pupils narrowed into slits and the red tint growing on his cheeks and the tip of his ears. If Dazai approaches, he'd get bitten. How aggressively adorable. You'd leave me to die then. Dazai pouted. I'd be the cause of your death if I could, Chuuya retorted. Now shut up and pay attention. Dazai couldn't really take Chuuya's harsh words seriously with how his ears were burning the same shade as his hair. But he obeyed and focused on Recovery Girl's long-winded explanation. Chuuya was the type to wear his emotions on his sleeve, a trait that Dazai had always criticized and took advantage of, much to the ginger's chagrin. But he supposes it's better than having to fake them. All right, get into groups of 2, Recovery Girl instructed. We're going to play a game today. As you can see, I've set up a few stations around the room with different dummy bodies. You'll have 5 minutes to diagnose the injuries and write down how to deal with it on a sheet of paper. You can move on to the next station when you're finished. The last to finish will have to stay back and clean the room. Excited chatters and a few unmistakable groans sounded from their classmates as they shuffled to their partners. It goes without saying that Dazai and Chuuya would be a pair, so there wasn't a need for them to move. Chuuya, I'll need your cooperation later. Dazai's earlier playful tone took a serious turn. Recovery Girl is almost always at the infirmary. Even if she left, it would only be for a brief moment. Not nearly enough for Dazai to complete his task. With her here teaching 1A, it was Dazai's chance to snoop around. Chuuya raised an inquisitive eyebrow at him. It didn't take long for him to understand what Dazai was trying to convey. It's what he likes about Chuuya, how he could so effortlessly read between the lines. Dazai-kun, Nakahara-kun. Recovery Girl approached them from behind, her cane making rhythmic thumps on the ground. Dazai wonders why she doesn't just kiss herself and heal her aging back herself. I went over this topic a few weeks back with 1A. Since you guys only joined last week, there's no need for you to participate. You're free to sit this one out and observe your classmates. Hey, but that'd be too boring, sensei. Chuuya and I will do just fine. Our guardian is a doctor after all. Dazai could practically hear the eye roll Chuuya had just given him. So what if he was up to no good by coaxing an old lady? He's trying to get them back for God's sake. Not even a speck of appreciation for all the hard work he's putting in. HMPH, ungrateful slug. Oh, that's quite a surprise. All right, I'll look forward to seeing your results. With that, Recovery Girl returned to the front of class while their classmates shuffled to the stations they were assigned to. There were 10 stations in total, each with its own dummy body and a statement of their conditions. Since there were 22 of them, Yaoyorozu and Jiro along with Kaminari and Siro were assigned to the same station as them, while the other stations had 2 groups instead. Here, Chuuya, try to keep up. Dazai tossed the pen and paper to Chuuya, who will obviously be doing the writing. Of course, the genius of their group, which is Dazai obviously, had to step up and offer his wisdom. TCH, arrogant bastard. Though Chuuya said that, he didn't protest, already prepared to write down everything that comes out of Dazai's mouth. Without further ado, the timer started. Everyone went to work immediately, their competitive side emerging. While there isn't a special prize for being the first, there's definitely a certain glory at being able to win against your classmates. He and Chuuya will be the ones to taste that glory. Dazai scanned over the statement written and examined the body briefly. It only took him 2 seconds to figure out what's going on. Bone fracture at the forearm, he said, already moving on to the next station. Restrict movement of the arm and put it in a sling to stabilize it. Chuuya wrote everything down without looking up, following him to the next station. Wait, you guys are done already? Kaminari asked from behind. Dazai didn't bother to answer as he made his way over to the next station where Todoroki, Takoyami, Sato, and Aoyama were. Like the previous station, Dazai scanned over the statement and did a brief checkup of the body. Water has entered lungs due to drowning, causing suffocation. Dazai began. Check for breathing and pulse. Perform CPR immediately. 30 chest compressions followed by 2 rescue breaths to remove water from lungs. Next station. Difficulty in breathing and wheezing due to inhaling too much smoke. Next. Brain concussion from blunt force trauma. Next. Broken ribs causing puncture through lungs. How the hell are they doing this? They didn't just give up and write nonsense, right? Is this for real? In 10 minutes, Dazai had cleared each station, leaving his classmates dumbfounded and staring wide-eyed. Chuuya had also written everything down in record speed, his cursive words just barely readable. Oh, that was fast. Are you sure you don't want to double-check? Recovery girl had a rather skeptical look on her face as she retrieved the paper Chuuya handed her. It's fine. If there's anything wrong, it's probably just Chuuya's horrible spelling, Dazai replied with a pleasant smile on his face. Oi, well, if you say so. Recovery girl started squinting, reading over the sheet of paper. There was no need for Dazai to wonder if he got them right. He knows he got them right. Mori's teaching played a big part in his current understanding of human anatomy. It's required in his line of work after all. Dazai barely registered Recovery girl's praise as he had already shifted his attention to his classmates. They seemed to be burning with a newfound vigor as they worked twice as hard to diagnose their injured patients. While observing may be a nice word to put it, Dazai's actually scrutinizing each of his classmates' movements, documenting every minute detail into his mind palace. There was no helping it. A traitor existed amongst their ranks. He didn't forget to keep track of the time too as he focused on his classmates. However, it was still much too early for his plan to hatch. There was no way he would be left alone if Recovery girl was so unoccupied right now. He needed to time his actions perfectly. There was no room for mistakes. The second group to finish is Midoriya and Ada, who took almost double the time Dazai and Chuuya did. While they weren't as apprehensive as before, both of them still kept their distance. Not that Dazai feels bad or anything. They could only blame themselves for having the misfortune of bumping into them. Damn, you guys were flying through the course. Kirishima came up to them just then, having finished in 4th place right after Yaoyorozu and Jiru. I would probably still be stuck on the 3rd station if it weren't for Bakugo. We could have gotten 1st place if you had used half your brains, shitty hair. Bakugo berated. Dazai doubted Bakugo would get 1st place even if he gave the gremlin a head start. But it certainly had been a surprise to find out he ranked amongst the top in his class. Chuuya could never. My guardian is a doctor, so I'm more familiar when it comes to injuries. He omitted the part where it was him inflicting the injuries. While Mori is far from being a guardian, it's an undeniable fact that he was the one who taught Dazai most of what he knows today. He was a great teacher, a bit too great in fact. And now was the time for Dazai to utilize the man's teachings. Here, let me show you a trick. Before anyone could even realize what trick it was and attempt to stop him, Dazai had already dislocated his left shoulder, his joint sticking out unnaturally. The unmistakable cracking of bones was like a loud echo in the room, drawing everyone's attention towards the source, which was Dazai in this case. From his peripheral vision, he could make out Recovery girl's horrified expression. Good, his plan is going smoothly. WOAH. What the hell, dude? Kirishima started panicking, his hands flailing around, unsure of what to do. Even Bakugo had a rare show of concern, his jaw laying slack. Only Chuuya remained calm by his side, though the slight twitch of his brows didn't go unnoticed. All Dazai felt was a dull pain thrumming through his shoulder as it lay motionless beside him. His sense of pain had long since been numbed, thanks to all the training Mori has put him through. In return, he knew exactly where to strike to inflict the worst pain possible. A worthwhile trade, if he does say so himself. When Recovery girl was just a few paces away, Dazai popped his joint back into place, his shoulder as good as new. Dazai-kun, are you alright? Why would you suddenly do that? Let me check. Recovery girl looked like she wanted to yank him down just so she could inspect him, yet she refrained, afraid of hurting Dazai even more. How considerate of her. It's nothing, sensei. I was just showing them a trick I learned. No biggie. Dazai rolled his shoulder back and forth to further convince her, yet her skeptical look remained regardless. Good, just the reaction he expected. Trick or not, I still have an obligation to take care of my students' well-being. Recovery girl sighed. Then she turned towards Chuuya. Nakahara-kun, take Dazai-kun to the infirmary. I'll do a brief checkup on him when class is over. Yes, ma'am. When Chuuya dragged him away, a small smile played on his lips. Time to commence phase 2 of his plan. Dazai hates pain. At least that's what Chuuya is aware of from how he acts all the time. But seeing him so readily break his body like that without so much as a flinch, that changes things altogether. He's aware Dazai had been put through training when he joined the Port Mafia just like he did. But he doesn't exactly know what kind of training. Chuuya was mainly trained in his combat skills and martial arts since his role in the Mafia is a damage dealer. As for Dazai, he specializes in strategies and negotiations. Torturing the Mafia's prisoners was his specialty too. How does one get so good at torturing others? Chuuya doesn't even want to imagine it. Chuuya let go of Dazai's collar when they arrived at the infirmary, which was thankfully empty, much like what Dazai had predicted previously. Okay, Chibai, just stand guard here and alert me if someone's coming, Dazai instructed, already heading straight to Recovery Girl's desk. I'll just be snooping around. Though Chuuya hates being on watchdog duty, he nodded nonetheless. Make it quick. Already Dazai was opening cabinets and sifting through tons of documents he found, putting everything back in place like no one had touched them before. Since there weren't any cameras in the infirmary too, no one would know what they're up to unless they witnessed it for themselves. When Dazai came across a locked cabinet, he retrieved a paper clip from under the folds of his bandages, bending it into shape. With just a few twists and turns, the lock gave way with a satisfying click. Inside were even more files, which Dazai examined carefully this time. Chuuya's eyes snagged on the tag labeled 1 on the file Dazai was holding. His lips quirked up in a smug way, indicating the brunette got what he came for. Why would he need the medical records of Class 1 though? Dazai flipped open the file, scanning over each page thoroughly, no doubt already imprinting it into his memory. He had always been too smart for his own good. Chuuya got lost in his thoughts while watching Dazai do his thing. Memories of the past surfaced in his mind. All the time spent with Dazai and his irritating quips. Without fail, Chuuya would always move to smack his head or kick him in the ass or stomp on his foot, which were mostly avoided by that slimy mackerel. The ones that do land though, he would give a dramatic yelp or squeak of pain. Chuuya wonders if he was just faking it all this time, because there's no way a smack to the head would hurt more than breaking your body and putting it back to place. After all, it takes a lot to inflict pain on someone who's numb to it. Recovery Girl just turned around the corner, Chuuya informed, watching through the glass panel on the door. Dazai only hummed an acknowledgement, putting his full concentration back on scanning 1A's documents. He was almost done, but they had barely any time left to return everything back into its position before Recovery Girl came barreling through the door. Anytime now. 15 seconds left. Dazai. 10 seconds. Dazai. 5 seconds. By the time she lowered the door handle, Chuuya had already hopped away, sitting on an empty couch. Dazai had somehow managed to put the files back, relocked the cabinet, and plopped himself on the bed like he was supposed to. When the door opened, everything was as it should be, with Recovery Girl not noticing anything amiss. Dazai winked at him playfully from the bed. Sly bastard. Dazai-kun, let me examine you. Recovery Girl wasted no time in checking up on Dazai, pressing the palm of her hands on his shoulder. Chuuya noticed the imperceptible jolt from the mackerel upon contact. Tell me if it hurts. When Dazai didn't react in any way or even flinch back from pain, Recovery Girl finally decided that he was fine without any issues. Dazai-kun, don't ever do that again. It's not okay to purposely hurt yourself for a trick, understand? She reprimanded. Not that Dazai would ever listen, but for appearance sake, Dazai only nodded and gave her a mock salute. Now go back to class. Dazai didn't hesitate to jump off the bed and leave the infirmary, Chuuya falling into step beside him. You got what you need? Chuuya asked halfway on their walk. Yup, Dazai said in a cheery tone. There wasn't anything wrong about it, but Chuuya could tell it was forced. That's when he remembered Dazai hates being touched by strangers too. He what? Aizawa's fingers froze over his keyboard, trying to process what the staff assistant just told him. He's pretty sure his eyes were as big as saucers because what he was just told was too unbelievable. Are you sure? Yes, sir. That's what I was informed of. The assistant nodded her head vigorously, looking like she wanted to be gone from there as soon as possible. Aizawa tends to forget his face can get pretty scary when he doesn't have enough sleep. Knowing this, he dismissed the assistant, who hurried away immediately. 4 hours of sleep in 2 days really did him in, huh? This troublesome brat. Aizawa had a feeling he's about to lose even more sleep because of the 2-time leaper brats. What's got you so hung up, Shouta? Hizashi's head popped out from behind the divider separating their tables. Frankly speaking, he was too tired to deal with his friend who's like a big ball of unending energy. But ignoring him would backfire instead. He really doesn't have the patience to deal with Hizashi's continuous pestering if he ignored the man. Dazai dislocated his shoulder during first aid class today. Aizawa started, already dreading the paperwork this incident would entail. First was Nakahara Chuuya putting everyone in the infirmary. Then it was Dazai Osamu putting himself in the infirmary. He then put it back into place. That's not too bad then. No one got hurt at least, Hizashi shrugged. Maybe if he were in his position, Hizashi would realize just how much chaos their presence promised. He did that on purpose, Hizashi. Oh, it's only been a week since they arrived, yet they're on track to break 1A's record of causing troubles already. Aizawa wanted nothing more than to find a way for them to return just so he could get his previous not-so-chaotic life back. 1A is already a handful, adding the both of them would just double his workload. Aizawa needs a raise, and a vacation to the Bahamas or something. I probably shouldn't be saying this, but Hisashi started, darting his eyes around to see if anyone was eavesdropping. When he deemed it safe, he continued, but they kind of unsettle me. I don't know how to put my finger on it, but there's just this sinister vibe I get from them, you know. Aizawa does, in fact, no. He had been suppressing that feeling ever since he first met them, thinking it was just him being paranoid over two lost kids. So knowing someone shared the same thoughts as him is both relieving and worrying. At first, Aizawa attributed this feeling to the fact that he has knowledge about them working for the Mafia, whether willingly or unwillingly. And only 3 people were privy to this fact: Nezu, Toshinori, and him. If Hisashi is getting the same feeling as him despite his lack of knowledge on their background, then there's definitely something wrong with them. Not to mention the fact that his quirk works on neither of them. Dazai's he could understand. Their quirks most likely cancels each other out. But Chuuya's, there must be a reason why his quirk doesn't work on the gravity manipulator. Just what secrets were they hiding? Especially that Dazai kid. Hisashi continued on. He certainly didn't find it shameless to be gossiping about a student right in front of their homeroom teacher. Like, I've heard about how strong that Nakahara kid is, but honestly, Dazai scares me more. Aizawa couldn't agree more. Not that he'd say it out loud, or he'd risk getting roped into Hisashi's gossiping. If Nimari was here, she'd gladly indulge him though. The bell rang, signaling for the next period. Aizawa and Hisashi started packing their stuff to go to class. His next class was practicals with Wano alongside Toshinori. After what happened, he's pretty sure Dazai would sit this one out too, like he usually did. At least he has a valid excuse this time. There hasn't been any news from Nezu's end regarding his investigation into Dazai's and Nakahara's situation. And if the both of them were going to stay here for a long period of time, he's going to keep a close eye on them. Aizawa will take it upon himself to subdue them if they ever pose a threat to his students. Hey, so we're going to train for the school festival, do you want to join? Both Dazai and Chuuya looked at him for a good long second before replying. Yeah, sure, we have nothing else to do anyways. Only then did Midoriya let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. It was his first time taking the initiative to talk to them after what happened the other day. Call him a coward. But it wasn't easy talking to someone who almost put a bullet through your head and hurt your friends. To be honest, he felt ashamed for having avoided them like a plague for so long. After All Might revealed the truth behind their situation, Midoriya couldn't help but feel pity for them. To be thrown so far into the future where none of their family or friends were alive, they must be terrified. Though just because Midoriya felt sympathy for them doesn't mean it made it any easier to talk to them. His classmates seemed to have warmed up to them. Even Kachin doesn't look so annoyed with them, but that's because they were unaware of what they're capable of, especially Dazai. All this time, only Chuuya had shown his impeccable martial prowess during practical training while Dazai mostly watched on the sidelines without participating. Combined with his lanky figure and the lack of knowledge of his true capabilities, it's natural that his classmates would think he doesn't pose much of a threat compared to Chuuya. A severely incorrect assumption, in his opinion. He had experienced firsthand what Dazai was capable of when he had been pinned down and unable to move. Not to brag, but he has gone through hellish training before succeeding All Might's legacy, so he's pretty sure he could easily overpower Dazai in strength. But that was clearly not the case when he'd been rendered useless under his weight. Dazai isn't weak. That much was at least clear to Midoriya. Yet, hesitant as he might be, he mustered up the courage to talk to them, because he made All Might a promise. 2 days ago, Midoriya hummed a light tune as he made his way over to the teacher's lounge with his bento box. It was Katsuden today, his favorite, and All Might had scheduled to meet up during break time the day before. He feels a tad bit bad for leaving his friends without a proper explanation. But it isn't every day you get to have a one-to-one meal with your idol who's also your mentor secretly. He wouldn't miss it for the world. I'm here, All Might, Midoriya greeted as he opened the door. All Might was in his shrunken form, which he had gotten used to seeing, to his dismay. Come in, sit, young Midoriya, he obliged, taking a seat across from his mentor. After having lunch sessions like this with All Might for so long, he didn't feel embarrassed when he was the only one eating while his mentor just observed. It was quite relaxing on the contrary. Chewing his second piece of katsuden, All Might spoke up then. How's your class's preparations for the upcoming school festival? It's going great actually, Midoriya started explaining. Jiru-san is handling the band members and is already composing a song. She's got the rhythm and melody down, just struggling a little on the lyrics part. Midoriya knows he's a chatterbox, especially when it comes to things he's passionate about. Sometimes when he gets too excited and catches himself, he'd feel a bit embarrassed for talking non-stop, afraid others might find it bothersome. But All Might wasn't like that. He always listened patiently with a smile, waiting for him to complete his story without interrupting. It's what made him grow attached, idolizing his mentor even more. All Might isn't just an ordinary mentor to him. He was like the father figure Midoriya never had the chance to experience. As for the dancing part, Mina-san is teaching us the moves she choreographed, Midoriya continued. Though I'm still a bit of a mess since I've never danced before. I'll need to practice more so I don't let my classmates down. That's good to hear, All Might smiled. Then Midoriya noticed the subtle change in his demeanor. How All Might crossed his fingers in front of him. How he was looking around the room without making direct eye contact with him. All the little things Midoriya had observed thus far. Actually, I scheduled this meeting because I have a favor to ask you. Of course, there's no way All Might would schedule a meeting out of the blue and risk their relationship from being exposed. The fact that Midoriya is the next wielder of One for All should be kept a secret for as long as possible, until he was able to handle the burden that came with succeeding the legacy of the symbol of peace. It was also for Midoriya's safety that this information cannot be disclosed. What is it, All Might? Midoriya set his bento down, concentrating his full attention on All Might's next words. This seemed serious, and he was getting anxious. Was it his health? Or maybe the LOV? I know this may be too much to ask of you considering what had happened, but can you keep an eye out for Dazai and Chuuya? Befriend them and get to know them more too, if you can. Well, that was definitely a favor Midoriya least expected. Not only has Midoriya not spoken a word to them, he even avoided making direct eye contact with them. A really pathetic move, Midoriya is aware. May I ask why? He said tentatively. Oh, it's not that I'm refusing your request, All Might. It's just this was so sudden, so I was curious about what your reasons were. And I'm not saying I have any object. There's an innate darkness in them. All Might started, his looks crestfallen, like he had failed to save someone from danger. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I can feel it. I feel it in my bones. There's something about them that just isn't right. Midoriya went silent, taking his time to ponder over All Might's words. I shouldn't be telling you this, but you're the only one I trust with this information, All Might continued on, his cerulean blue eyes searing into him. There was determination in it, and a mix of desperation. You're probably wondering why Dazai carries a gun around and how Chuuya is so adept at fighting right. It's because they're associated with the Mafia. The Mafia, he exclaimed. Wouldn't that be considered as a villain organization then? Like the Hasekai Yakuza group. They're just the same age as us. Were they coerced to join the Mafia? Questions were piling up in his head, which only led to more unanswered questions he couldn't voice out. Dazai and Chuuya had always been a mystery to him. Even with his observational skills, he could never get a read on the both of them. Now, with this newfound knowledge, the fog shrouding the truth about them just grew thicker. Just who exactly were they? That's what I believed at first. But from their speech, it doesn't seem to be that case. Even if they had joined reluctantly, they seem to be staying there willingly. That's just absurd. Who in the world would willingly stay in a place surrounded by violence and death? Young Midoriya, I hate to break it to you, but we can't exactly judge them based on our current system, All Might explained in a grim voice. As you know, they're from the past when quirks had just started to develop in humans. You've learned in history class that those days were considered the dark era of quirks. Villains were using their quirks to commit evil and wreak havoc, he sighed while rubbing his nose bridge. You can't blame them if they were forced to join a villain organization for survival if they grew up in that situation. Midoriya's shoulder sagged in defeat. All Might is right. He shouldn't just draw conclusions based on what he knows today. It was his fault for not thinking about things from their perspective. To grow up in such a place where danger lurks everywhere, they must have been forced to mature earlier than most to ensure their own survival. That must be tough, he commented sullenly. All at once, the times when Midoriya had purposely avoided them seemed so shameful now. He was judging them even before knowing about their story. How unheroic of him. And, I think Dazai has suicidal thoughts, All Might said, his fingers clenching around each other. Both he and Chuuya were talking about suicide like it was an everyday topic, which concerns me deeply. But when I approached them, they shut me down, said they didn't need saving. Suicidal thoughts. Midoriya never knew that. Dazai had always shown his mischievous side to his classmates, never revealing anything more or less than what they expected. But to think it was just one of his masks, that would explain how he had been so nonchalant when hurting himself. Maybe the bandages. At this rate, they're going to tumble down a spiral of darkness and never see the light again. I don't want to see that happen. That's why I want you to show them the light, young Midoriya. Can you do that? All Might's pleading voice was a persuasive factor, but Midoriya already had every intention of doing so after hearing about their story. He's aiming to be the symbol of peace to carry on All Might's legacy. He wouldn't abandon someone who's clearly in need of help. He will do whatever it takes to save them. Yes, I can, and I will. Back to the present. Earth to Midoriya. Are you there? Midoriya was startled out of his thoughts by Ashido's voice. Her pink face tilted sideways as she regarded him. He glanced around, noticing how everyone was staring at him with concerned gazes. Right, he was supposed to be practicing for the school festival. He must have drifted off to his thoughts halfway through. How embarrassing. But All Might's words just kept replaying in his mind, repeating over and over and over. Deku-kun, are you alright? Do you need some rest? Uraraka came up to him then, her brows creased in worry. And no problem. I'm fine. Really, he rushed to explain. How could he tell her about what he knew? She'd likely freak out. Just being near Chuuya sets her on edge after she had to experience being crushed under gravity twice. Uraraka didn't seem convinced, but he's grateful that she let it go. Come on then. Mina-chan is teaching us the next part of the dance. As she ushered him over, his gaze unknowingly flitted over to where Dazai and Chuuya were perched on the second-floor balcony, watching over their classmates. Many had tried to dissuade them from passing up their participation in the school festival to no avail. Dazai and Chuuya were adamant in not participating, and no one can convince them otherwise. He stared at the Mafia duo, who looked like they were having another bout of bickering again from afar, though Midoriya couldn't hear them. Dazai was flashing a goofy grin across his face while Chuuya had his fists clenched like he was about to throw a punch at the brunette. When Ashido clapped her hands, drawing his classmates' attention to her, he tore his gaze away from the pair. While All Might's request was important, it doesn't mean he can neglect his role in the school festival. His task from All Might would have to wait until after the school festival. As he learned the new moves Ashido demonstrated, he would glance up at the balcony every now and then, observing the pair. Sometimes, they would share a hearty laugh, or Dazai would be pouting while Chuuya had an annoyed expression, or both of them would be whispering with a serious face even if there wasn't anyone around to hear it. Despite their continuous bickering and Chuuya's constant threat of breaking Dazai's face, Midoriya could tell there was an inseparable bond between them, how they would watch each other's back and trust the other to keep them safe. He swears he had even seen them communicating with their eyes only, with not a single word exchanged. It felt like one soul residing in two bodies, Dazai and Chuuya. Then the realization hit him. In that bleak and dark world of theirs, where cruelty was like a blade that was aiming for their lives, they only had each other. They could only rely on each other, trust each other, belong to each other. He still felt ashamed for jumping into conclusions without any proof. The determination to complete All Might's task burned in him. He will let them understand it wouldn't need to be just them fighting against the world. And the more he observed, the more he noticed. About Dazai especially. It's like he could barely see past his mask whenever he's with Chuuya. He seems happier. The glass turned to ashes before it could even break under the strength of his grip. Shigaraki had lost count of how many times this happened ever since that day. Every throb of his wound would bring him back to the humiliation he suffered at the hands of a bratty hero kid. Could that demon even be considered a hero? For once, Shigaraki's urge to kill Dazai overpowered his urge to end the symbol of peace. If his quirk doesn't work on him, then he'll personally cut him up. Slowly, painfully, he'll cut off that filthy tongue of his for daring to belittle their grand aspirations. Then he'll gouge his eyes out for daring to look at him like he was insignificant. And he'll keep him alive throughout the process, make him scream and wish he was killed instead. He'll also, Toga Himiko coming through. Toga's voice halted his increasingly gory thoughts. He turned, finding her perched on a wheelchair with Twice pushing from behind. Her right arm was hung in a sling, while her thigh was wrapped in bandages. Toga's condition was much worse compared to his. By the time Dazai dragged them back to base, she was already on the edge of losing consciousness from the blood loss. Were it not for Mr. Compress's knowledge in stitching, however little it was, the LOV might lose another one of its members. Why are you glaring at me so murderously like that, Shiggy? Toga asked, a mock innocence to her voice. Are you trying to steal Himiko's wheelchair cause the pain is too unbearable? You'll have to get your own wheelchair. I'm not sharing. Okay, maybe the LOV could stand to lose one of its members. Of course we have to share. He's our boss, Twice said. Of course we're not sharing. This is ours, Twice said again. Seriously? These imbeciles. Even if you're our boss, you can't just turn our glasses into ashes. How the hell are we supposed to drink then? Dazai's voice came from behind. He swiped the whiskey bottle off the counter, downing it directly from the bottle. And are you sure you're supposed to drink? You haven't even healed completely yet. Maybe he should just kill everyone and recruit new members into the LOV. His patience and his self-control is running dangerously thin. Shut the fuck up. It's because you seared my wound close that it's taking so long to heal. Shigaraki seethed, his hands itching to disintegrate something. In the end, Mr. Compress was only one person, and they can't exactly go to a hospital to get proper treatment. But if Shigaraki was just left to bleed out, he'd die before Toga was finished being treated. And so Dazai did the only thing he could and burned his flesh shut. The pain was so excruciating he'd foamed in his mouth. The humiliation was more unbearable than the pain itself. In the end, Mr. Compress had to use a much longer time to remove his burnt flesh before stitching them up again. Well, I deeply apologize for trying to save your ass, boss. Next time, I'll be sure to let you bleed out like the good subordinate I am. Dazai threw his hands up in exasperation, sinking himself onto the musty, old couch before chugging the whole bottle of whiskey down. What a mess, he heard Mr. Compress mutter from the corner of the room. Spinner was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Strangely quiet for a hot-headed reptile like him. When they got word the two transfers were loitering around the area of their new base, Shigaraki had been eager to see what the two of them were like. He had never heard of a private hero institution from Yokohama, so he had wanted to see what was so special about them. Surely, if they were so private that there was zero information about them anywhere, there must be something unique about them, right? Who would have thought his rashly made decision would end up costing them this much? If Dazai had been any more ruthless than he already was, or if he hadn't so conveniently used up all his bullets, the three of them wouldn't be alive right now. Which begs the question, what the hell did he use his bullets for? It frustrates him to know they were only alive because of Dazai's mercy. And he'll have to live with that frustration until he kills him off. What Shigaraki needs to do now is plan. He'll think of a foolproof plan, set up a trap to capture a rat. And instead of just 3, he'll use all of his subordinates this time. Maybe even utilize some of the nomas under his disposal. Yes, that's what he needs to do. Dazai Osamu needs to know that the LOV isn't one to be messed with. He'll pay for what he's done. He'll know. What that Dazai kid said, Spinner started, his tone lowered in caution. Our objective after achieving our goal of demolishing the Hero Society. What is our objective? The final thread of his sanity snapped. He lunged, his hand outstretched as he aimed for Spinner's reptilian neck. The sensations of decay danced across his fingertips, eager to destroy something. Everything. Someone is going to die here today. Then the small screen television that he used to contact Sensei buzzed to life. Shigaraki's hand stopped inches away from the lizard with widening eyes, his pupils narrowing to slits like how a reptile's would when in danger. He ignored it, rushing over to where the television crackled with static. Sensei, but wasn't he imprisoned? Sensei, is that you? He asked frantically, hitting the side of the television so it works. Sadly, it's not him, Tamura-kun. A familiar voice rang out instead. Not of Sensei's, but someone he's met a handful of times. Someone Sensei trusts more than him even. Doctor, but I do have a message to relay from him. Shigaraki gritted his teeth at the smug way he said it, like he's the only one who can speak to Sensei, and in turn order them around in the name of Sensei. Shigaraki was filled with murderous intent today. He reined in his anger, schooling his face into a neutral expression so Doctor doesn't have the luxury to see him frustrated. It was what he always criticized Shigaraki about. His short temper. What is it? Sensei said your actions were rash. Shigaraki's nails dug into his palms. Because of your carelessness, you were almost killed by a kid no older than 16. He's very disappointed. Shigaraki bit his lip until he could taste blood. Even though they're leagues away, Sensei imprisoned in Tartarus, while he was holed up in an abandoned bar, somehow, Sensei still knew of his every move. Even though Sensei was the one who took him in, nurtured him, fanning the flames of vengeance in him, still he wasn't enough. When will he ever be enough? I can fix this, Shigaraki thundered. The need to prove himself, to redeem himself, all of it was fueling him at this moment. He just needed to make it right, then Sensei would acknowledge him once more. I just need a plan. I'll set up a trap, then they'll be like a fish caught in a net. Borrow me some nomas and I'll finish this. You want nomas to deal with a couple of teenagers? My creations aren't your playthings to toy around. Tamura-kun. Doctor's voice was stern, like a parent reprimanding a child. A humiliation in Shigaraki's eyes. How dare he? Even if I agree to that absurd demand, Sensei has instructed you to leave the both of them alone. You're not to attempt something like that again or even go near them. Understood. But why? They're not even from UA, so why should we hold back? Shigaraki, in fact, could not understand. This wasn't how they operated. If they find a nuisance, they'll dispose of it immediately without delay. It was how they earned their notorious fame for being the League of Villains. And now Shigaraki is being asked to stay put. Sensei has his own reasons, was the only reply he got from Doctor. I know, but are you questioning him, Tamura-kun? Doctor cut him off, his voice going dangerously low. Shigaraki's mouth clamped shut. He could imagine Sensei before him, how his lips would be pulled down into a frown. Disappointment, failure, not enough, never enough. If there's no more questions, that'll be all, Doctor said, a finality to his tone, and as if Shigaraki hadn't suffered enough humiliation already. He reminded, remember, you're not to touch the 2 transfer students. Sensei has his plans for them. Do not interfere. With that, the connection ended, the Doctor's silhouette replaced by Shigaraki's reflection. I don't know why, but I want to stab him, Toga commented, her usual smile morphing into a frown. Then the bar counter turned to ashes altogether. Chuuya was being summoned. It was yet another new experience for him in this new world. Okay, maybe not so new considering how Chuuya and Mori could do just the same since they were his higher-ups. But it was different. Chuuya didn't mind being summoned by them because he was loyal to them. Not because it's what he's expected to do. There's a world of difference between the two. However, that apparently isn't the case when it comes to UA transfer student Nakahara Chuuya. If a teacher calls you, you are to answer, especially so when it's the principal himself requesting the meeting. Though he's less annoyed by that fact and more concerned about why it was him only. What about Dazai? Why was he left out? Or rather, why was he chosen? Arg. Thinking frustrates him. It only ever generates more questions with no answers to. Besides, looking back at his reaction, Dazai doesn't seem to think it was a big deal. Go on, you can handle this. While Chuuya appreciates the trust his partner had in him, it was vexing to know how Dazai had already figured the whole thing out in less than 3 seconds since he was summoned. Well, whatever, he'll figure it out in due time. The doors to the principal's office appeared in front of him when he turned the corner, sitting at the end of the hallway. Much like Mori's without the glam and extravagance, Chuuya noted. Time to find out what Yue was planning. You called. Nakahara-kun. Just the man I wanted to see. If Nezu was annoyed by the fact that Chuuya hadn't knocked and just barged in rudely, he didn't show it, wearing only a pleasant smile across his face. A calculated smile to be precise. Come, sit. Nezu hopped down from his seat, making his way over to where his couch was. Chuuya took the seat across from him, not letting his guard down for even a fraction of a second. If his quirk really does grant him intelligence that surpasses that of humans, then Chuuya had to be alert. He could be just as crafty as Dazai, seeing as how he'd always fall for the mackerel's traps unknowingly. Well, if he could handle the real Dazai, there's no reason he couldn't handle a copy of him. So, why have you called me here? Only me and not Dazai. Well, it's been almost 2 weeks since you guys arrived here. As your host, I ought to ask how you're faring, Nezu said while sipping on his tea. Chuuya eyed him, suspicion flaring under his skin. Nezu called him here just to ask how he was doing. Bullshit. If that were the case, Dazai wouldn't have been left out. There was no logical explanation why he would ask for one's opinion and disregard the other. Nezu was trying to coax information out of him. That he was very much clear. Though if it were Dazai, he'd never be so foolishly obvious. Hell, to think all those days of him being tormented by that resilient cockroach would actually come in handy when dealing with people who were exactly like him. That didn't mean he appreciates that stupid waste of bandages though. I'm getting by. Chuuya played along, his vigilant posture relaxing as he settled into the couch. It was only just for show though. There's no way he'd let his guard down around someone whose wits were equal to that of Dazai. Classes are boring though. Haha, I suppose sitting for so long to listen to someone talk every day can be quite tedious. Cut the crap and spit out what you want. There's no way you called me here just to have small talk. Chuuya glared at the rat in front of him. He had no mind to care for manners. They weren't exactly at the stage to be sharing smiles and respect for each other. This was merely a business relationship. Yue uses their abundant resources to get to the bottom of this while they play their part as transfer students, being under their watch willingly in exchange for their help. I suppose that would be good for the both of us, Nezu smiled, setting his cup of tea down. That pleasant atmosphere around him faded away, taking on a shrewder demeanor. Usually, these kinds of things were more of Dazai's forte, but Chuuya had dealt with enough shrewd bastards to know how to handle people like Nezu. Well, I won't beat around the bush then. I know the two of you are doing investigations of your own, so tell me, what have you guys found out so far? Straight to the point. Huh, I like it. Chuuya grinned, unconsciously cracking his knuckles like he was preparing for a fight. This time, it would be a fight of wits instead of strength. That's a question we should be asking. We've heard almost nothing from you since 2 weeks ago when you agreed to lead the investigation. I sure do hope you're not trying to keep the information to yourself. Nezu chuckled. Chuuya frowned. He must have caught on to something from his answer. Can I assume that you deflecting my question means you guys have a clue? TCH. This is why he hates dealing with conniving bastards like Dazai. Two can play this game. Then I take it you asking me this question means you guys found nothing, right? Chuuya shot back. 2 weeks with nothing to show. It was right for them to not show their cards, however eager they were to return. They'd never really know if the heroes were friend or foe, as embarrassed as I am to admit it. That is sadly the case for us, Nezu answered, still calm as ever. He revealed his hands easily without hiding much. A fool's move, if Chuuya had anything to say about it. A clever move to make him let his guard down. If he had been any less vigilant as he was now, he would have fallen for it. I tried checking the security footage from back then numerous times, but nothing came up. All it showed was the flash of white before the two of you appeared in place of our students. There was no one remotely nearby who could have been the cause of this incident. Chuuya kept silent as he pondered over Nezu's words. With how tight the security here was, it was weird how Yue hadn't even been able to narrow down a list of suspects. And if this was the work of the LOV to cause unrest in the school, it's weirder why they chose to target 2 ordinary students instead of the prone-to-attack Class 1A hero students. Plus, Dazai met up with the LOV before, who were completely clueless of their origins. If there wasn't a breach in security when this happened, then it had to be someone from the inside who caused this. Have you ever entertained the idea that the culprit who caused this is someone from your timeline? Nezu asked after a bout of silence, his eyes glistening as he took in Chuuya's reaction. Only a mask of indifference covered his face, not even the littlest crease in his brows. If the culprit is from my timeline, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now because we'd have already returned long before. Mori would have caught the culprit and undo this whole thing in 3 days, max. It wasn't an exaggeration. It was simply a statement. Straight, cold, hard facts. The Port Mafia's efficiency and effectiveness isn't one to be scoffed at. At this time, Chuuya would probably be busy completing their next mission with that shitty Dazai. Mori's coded message also tells them the culprit was right here with them. Not that the principal needs to know about that. Yet, until Dazai finds the perfect leverage to use against the heroes, that place stays a secret. He doesn't mind spending a few more weeks here. It's peaceful. Nezu squinted. You sound awfully sure about that. I am, and Dazai's ability is absolute. Unless we somehow miraculously spawned here, there's no way Dazai wouldn't be able to nullify any quirk or ability that could have potentially caused this. Nezu's lips pinched into a thin line, his calm demeanor showing signs of cracking. It isn't every day a teenager would tell off someone who supposedly has an intelligence quirk, but it doesn't seem like Nezu was particularly annoyed by that fact. The worry on his face actually looked genuine. Nakahara-kun, as you know, it isn't just your lives that were affected because of this phenomenon. 2 of our students were also involved. As the principal, it's my duty to ensure their safety at all costs. So, please, using my title as principal, I implore you to share whatever clues you've gathered thus far. Unexpectedly, he lowered his head into a bow. The principal of Japan's best hero school to someone who doesn't even belong there. It seemed like Nezu was at his wit's end, seeing as how coaxing information out of him wasn't working. Nezu had decided to persuade him outright, even putting down his status to do so. Chuuya can see the dedication the principal has for his students, and he almost wants to reveal just a little of what they had gathered. Frankly speaking, he doesn't know why Dazai is dragging this on for so long. His concerns for not acting alone in case the place doesn't even exist and they ended up throwing away their only sanctuary in this timeline was valid. But Chuuya couldn't understand why he was so adamant on keeping them from the heroes. While it was a ridiculous title, they certainly fit the role with their overly righteous way of living. Chuuya can't imagine them trying to sabotage whatever information Mori had left behind for them simply because they don't have the capacity to. Not with that mindset of theirs. Chuuya bit the insides of his cheeks, hesitating for just a fraction of a second. Then the realization hit him. Why was it him alone that was summoned here without Dazai? Dazai couldn't be manipulated. Chuuya could. And he almost fell for this intricate plot Nezu had set up. The rat principal had never expected him to reveal any information from the start. His show of being at his wit's end was all just a ploy to get him to speak. And it almost worked. Almost. The coffee table between them split in half as the couch he was sitting on folded in on itself. The already cold, unfinished tea splashed to the ground, gathering at the bottom of the crater that had appeared in the middle of the room. You've got some nerve trying to trick me for information, you rodent. Raw power rippled across his body, encasing it in a faint red glow. The space around him distorted a little as the gravity multiplied. I'll remind you that you aren't the ones holding the reins here. We only agreed to stay here because you're our best chance, not because you're our only choice. Even without the help of UAS heroes, Chuuya is confident that Dazai and him would find a way to return, even if it takes a longer time. If you don't want news of your incompetence about losing 2 students right under your nose spreading, I suggest you behave. Chuuya couldn't tell much with his bangs covering his eyes, his head tipped low. But judging from the way Nezu was forced back onto the wall made it clear he got his point across. Pull that stunt again, Chuuya continued, the crater growing in size beneath him. And I'll guarantee you those 2 students aren't the only ones you'll be losing. Saying what he needed to, Chuuya spun, heading straight for the door. Before he could even reach for the doorknob, the door burst open, revealing more than half the staff teachers who were also pro-heroes standing outside, their bodies poised for battle. Principal, are you all right? We heard a loud explode. It didn't take long for the pro-heroes to take in what happened. The crater that had formed in the middle of the room, Nezu with his back against the wall, and Chuuya giving them a murderous glare. Move, was all he said in response to their questioning gazes. Present Mike and Midnight were the first to show up to the scene, their frames occupying the entrance. Their brows creased into a frown, clearly unhappy with how rudely Chuuya was acting right now. Not that he has any fucks to give. Explain yourself, young man. This behavior is, I said. Move, he repeated once again, his fingers twitching at his sides as his ability threatened to run rampant and devastate the whole area. More teachers were arriving. He eyed Snipe coming up from the corner along with the ectoplasm guy. That cement-looking teacher was also rushing over from the other end. A bunch of vermin. If they won't move, Chuuya will make them move. Before all hell broke loose, a familiar voice shouted at them. Stop. All heads swiveled around to find Aizawa was the one who shouted. His quirk was activated, with how his eyes glowed red, his hair standing on its end. The scarf around his neck had been unwound, prepared to capture anything that went astray. Azashi, Nimori, let him pass. Aizawa's unexpected aid wasn't short of surprising to him. Chuuya always felt the man was a touch apprehensive when it came to him and Dazai. Though Aizawa's intervention did nothing to help alleviate this growing impatience he felt for the heroes. The more time he spends here in this hero world, the more stuck up he finds them. What he wouldn't do to put them in their place. But, Shouta, Present Mike started, his eyes still trained on him like looking away for 1 second will spell the end of his life. At least he has some senses, Chuuya will give him that. Though the other heroes didn't look so eager to just back down after an unwelcome intruder posing as a transfer student broke the rules and even threatened the life of their beloved principal. Only when Aizawa signaled to them with a subtle shake of his head did they loosen their stance a bit. Then, as if they had discussed this beforehand, Nezu spoke up, trying to diffuse the commotion. We're quite all right, everyone. When Nezu talked, everyone turned their attention to their precious little principal. Nezu dusted off his suit, seemingly unscathed save for the tea stain at the hem of his trousers when Chuuya broke the table. We just had a little disagreement, is all. Principal, are you sure? Nakahara-kun here broke the rules for using his quirk on school grounds though. Midnight sounded doubtful, her eyes darting between him and Nezu like she was ready to pounce on him should the principal say so. A crowd was starting to gather. Even a small group of students who were close by when his anger exploded earlier were trying to get a good look at what's happening. And Chuuya was slowly getting surrounded by the pro heroes from UA. He was outnumbered, but not outmatched. Everyone, let's not make a fuss. Nezu tried appeasing the growing crowd, shutting the door to his room so no one could see how he had laid waste to the principal's office. No one was hurt and everything is fine. Let's all return to our positions now, shall we? Well, Chuuya supposes there's no need for any unnecessary violence. Not that he forgives the rat bastard for trying to trick him for information though. He'll settle the score next time. For now, a warning shall do. You pull that stunt like that ever again, he started, not even deigning to spare any manners for the principal to keep up appearances. I'll guarantee that you'll regret that. With that, he shouldered past the heroes blocking the hallways, giving them each a poisonous glare that held a deadly promise. Touch me and see what happens. Upon returning, Chuuya didn't bother to enter through the front entrance. Instead, he rounded the building, standing directly below a particular window on the 4th floor, then proceeded to launch himself up with the help of his gravity. He landed soundlessly on the balcony, the red glow of his ability dispelling as he willed it. This was much more efficient than taking an elevator. He approached the pair of sliding windows, which were weirdly plastered over with newspapers, blocking out any sunlight that could have penetrated it. Such was the trait of his accursed partner who's allergic to sunlight like the ghost he is. Back so soon, Dazai didn't even have to look to know it was him who had barged through his window. The bastard probably already anticipated it. I don't see the point in staying there any longer, Chuuya replied curtly. Any longer and the crater in the middle of the principal's room would be the least of their worries. Judging by the lack of commotion after your outburst, I assume Aizawa-sensei arrived in time. You sent Aizawa-sensei there. And why did you just assume I lost control? Well, Dazai wasn't technically wrong, but it still annoys him every time the mackerel guessed correctly. As if I would ever mistake the slightest tremor caused by your ability, Dazai bragged, his lips quirked into a smug smile. And I just casually mentioned how you were meeting with the principal who kinda resembles me. Aizawa-sensei quite literally ran off after that. Chuuya rolled his eyes. Cheeky bastard. Dazai hummed in acknowledgement, busying himself by pinning a document on the wall. It was only then did Chuuya think to take a closer look around Dazai's room. It was a dark room, barely lit by the weak bulb of the study lamp. Darkness wasn't the only companion of Dazai in his room though. Papers took up almost every inch of his space, pinned on the walls, scattered across the floor, piling on his desk. It was a forest of dead trees with how much papers there were. What the? He muttered, picking up a random paper by his feet. He flipped it over, finding a map printed on it. There was an area being circled in red with 3 big question marks. Location, time, was written in capital letters below it. Chuuya, put it back when you're done. While it may seem messy, it's technically organized in a specific system that fits me. Don't go messing up my progress now. Dazai's tone carried an air of lightheartedness, contrary to his words. He popped open the cap of a marker pen before jotting down more notes on the paper he was holding. What is this? Chuuya asked, his tone uncertain. It was never easy getting a read on Dazai's thoughts, even more so when anything he does is often complicated and ambiguous. Oh that. I was having a hard time figuring out on what basis does this quirk that transported us here work on. Like, is it because our locations coincide with the 2 UA students, or does it work on a specific time frame? Those kinds of things. He hadn't stopped writing as he explained it to Chuuya, his back hunched over as he pored over the paper. His answer only spurred more questions. Chuuya's certain Dazai only left it at that just so he would be forced to ask more. And Chuuya knows that he should ask about what he found out, about how it all works, just about anything that can let him better understand the situation they were in. Yet, what instead came out of his mouth was Dazai. How long has it been since you slept? Dazai stopped writing, blinking over at him. His face was unreadable as always, though that flash of surprise across his face didn't go unnoticed. From this angle, the light from the study lamp was only able to lit up the uncovered half of his face, casting strong shadows across his features. But not even the shadows could hide the haggardness of his face. Pale and frail, that was the only way to describe him. The silence stretched between them, Chuuya still waiting for an answer. Dazai's pupils darted left and right, most likely debating if he should joke about it or actually answer truthfully for once. In the end, he chose the latter. Like 2 days maybe, perhaps 3 days. Chuuya bit his lip. 4 days then. Go to sleep, shitty Dazai. A terrible feeling churned in him then. All this time, he was sulking about how bored it was playing the goody two-shoes hero students they were expected to be, missing the days when Mori would send them on missions. Hell, he sometimes even missed all those paperworks Dazai would shove to him. So seeing Dazai act so carefree and unbothered every time had mildly annoyed him. To think reality isn't at all what it seemed to be. How had he not noticed it at all? Not now, Chuuya. I'm busy calculating our coordinates to compare them with our coordinates here. I must admit though, geography isn't my strong suit, because he knew to look for it. Chuuya could tell that hint of exhaustion in Dazai's voice he failed to mask, that tiny instance when his voice cracked. When he breathed a little too hard like he was out of breath from just speaking. I'm not asking, Dazai. Go to sleep. His words left no room for negotiation. Before he could refute in any way, Dazai's mouth clamped shut, considering his words seriously for once. But being compliant isn't something Dazai's used to. The faster we can return, the better, no. Plus, Chuuya's so eager to return. I don't fucking care about that, Dazai. Yes, it's true that I want to return, but not like this. Not at the cost of destroying your body. As long as we have a chance to return, I'm fine with that. I don't care how long it takes. 2 months, 1 year, 10 years. I don't care. I care about you. Chuuya held his tongue just in time, his words left unspoken at the edge of his tongue. It took him a while to realize just what he was about to say. Heat creeping up at the base of his neck. He was thankful for the dimly lit room mostly shrouding his face in darkness. Why did he think that? Perhaps it was just in the heat of the moment. Or maybe it was just a natural emotional response to someone working so hard to fulfill his wishes. Or it was just how he truly felt. As simple as that. He gulped. If there's hope for us returning, he stammered. That's more than enough for me right now. So just listen for once and go to sleep, Dazai. You can do this another day. I can help you with it. To be frank, he doesn't actually know what he can do to help. He isn't as good with patterns, or numbers, or deduction like Dazai was, and he's pretty sure the mackerel knew that too, but instead of poking fun at it like how he'd usually do, Dazai kept quiet, only a silent acceptance at Chuuya's offer. Is Chuuya going to tuck me in then? Dazai cocked his head sideways, throwing him an innocent, questioning gaze. Sigh. You're insufferable as always, Chuuya huffed. He lowered his head to scratch at it in an irritating manner, a small smile playing across his lips. Who would have thought you'd be such a big baby? At least I'm big, unlike a certain chibai I know, Dazai shrugged. Back to his old self. You can either sleep in peace naturally, or I can punch your lights out and put you in a coma. Now choose wisely, Chuuya threatened. Yet his words lack none of the heat behind it. It almost sounds endearing. You. And Dazai did indeed choose wisely by shutting his mouth. Shaking off his jacket, he slid under his covers that looked untouched for days, a sign of just how much he had not slept. Chuuya would be a great nanny if he sang me a lullaby, Dazai commented as he got himself comfortable under the sheets. The only time I'll be singing for you is over your grave, Chuuya spat, turning off the sole source of light in this room. Immediately, the room was plunged into complete darkness. Even the cracks from the door were carefully blocked out by Dazai. The absolute darkness forced unwanted memories to surface in his mind, which he suppressed as best as he could. Chuuya should just stand there and not move until I wake up so you don't mess up the pattern I laid everything in. Dazai's voice was like an anchor, keeping him in place before his mind could drift off to somewhere unpleasant. At least he wouldn't need to be alone in the dark anymore. Oh please, I've cleaned up after you enough times to know all your stupid patterns, Dazai. Now stop being a dick and just sleep. I've trained my dog so well he's my maid now, Dazai mused, the exhaustion in his voice getting harder and harder to mask. Chuuya's the best. Then his sentence slurred into even, rhythmic breathings. Chuuya just stood there for a while, listening to his breaths until he was certain the mackerel was asleep, until he memorized each inhale and exhale of his. Sometimes, his breaths were so soft it was hard to tell if he was alive or not. At that point, his eyes have already mostly adjusted to the dark. It wasn't to the point where he could see everything clearly, but he could at least map out his surroundings. And like he always did, Chuuya started cleaning up after Dazai, picking up all his scattered documents and stacking them into a neat pile. How long had Dazai been doing this to accumulate this much information? Last week, since they arrived here. Before leaving, he walked over to Dazai's bedside, his footsteps light and silent. Watching the mackerel's chest rise up and down rhythmically brought him a sense of relief. Chuuya brushed a lock of hair away, the back of his hand resting gently on the brunette's brows. Sleep well, Osamu. And he left through the window as soundlessly as he came. People say violence isn't the answer to everything, but for Chuuya, it seemed to be his go-to solution whenever his frustration is starting to undo the seams of his sanity. Well, it couldn't technically be called violence. It was just him utilizing the facilities of UA to get some training in. Move his body around, get his mind to loosen up, blow off some steam. If he focuses on exhausting his body, he wouldn't have the time to think, to be swallowed up by his thoughts. Unfortunately, this method of his was hardly working this time. Throwing kicks and punches came so naturally to him that his body moved before his mind even thought to do so. With his body moving so habitually swift and smooth, his brain had little else to do except think, the one thing he was trying to avoid doing. Stupid Dazai, who's too prideful to ask for help. He threw a right jab. Stupid Dazai, who doesn't know how to take care of himself. His body twisted into a roundhouse kick. Stupid Dazai, who's always making him worry. A front kick this time. Each curse he spat in his mind, he accompanied it with a punch or a kick at the punching bag before him. The unfortunate victim of his pent-up frustrations. Stupid Dazai, who wouldn't leave his mind. 3 consecutive jabs to the middle. Useless Chuuya, who had done nothing to help. The force behind his last punch was so great. The punching bag flew off its hinges, the metal chain holding it up bending from the momentum of his punch. He watched it roll to the other side of the room, feeling a bit sorry for it. Hopefully, it was still usable so he wouldn't have to pay the damage fees. If you could punch that well, why do you not use your hands when fighting? Chuuya's head swiveled to where the voice came from. Being so preoccupied with his thoughts, he hadn't sensed anyone entering the gym. A slip that would have proven fatal in a different scenario. How careless of him. Standing at the entrance was his ever-explosive classmate, Bakugo Katsuki. He had on his sports attire, a towel draping across his neck. Had he come to train too? Gulping down a mouthful of water to rehydrate himself, he replied, I have my own principles. Huh, what? That you'd give yourself a handicap when fighting weaklings? Bakugo scoffed. Although a little irritated by his words, Chuuya wasn't in the mood to bicker right now. If I use my hands, it takes the thrill away from the fight. Not using it keeps me grounded so I don't go overboard. Now you're just being an arrogant fucking prick. Chuuya rolled his eyes. Well, he never expected the guy to understand his situation anyway. Think what you want. I don't give a shit. His mood was utterly ruined now. Why did he even bother telling someone as irrelevant as Bakugo about his principles? He should have just ignored him completely. Though deep down, Chuuya knew why. It was only to distract himself from his thoughts, forcing his mind to focus on his classmate instead of the growing anxiety in his head. Acting so high and mighty like you're better than everyone, huh? Get your ass over here. I'll make you have no choice but to use your hands. Bakugo started cracking his knuckles, like he was squaring up for a fight. Chuuya frowned. Was Bakugo trying to provoke him into a fight? Is that what he's aiming for? Confusion turned into understanding, then morphed into contemplation. Should he rise to such an obvious bait? Or should he just ignore him like what he should have done initially? There wasn't much to think about. He already knew the answer when he started considering the blonde's unspoken request. Putting down his water bottle, Chuuya walked into the ring, throwing a beckoning glance at him. Oh, try me then, Bakugo sneered, jumping into the ring. Huh, at least you've got the guts to bolster that arrogance of yours, says one of the most egotistical people Chuuya has ever met. He'll enjoy knocking him down a peg. For once, Chuuya found himself focusing on the fight ahead of him instead of the unwelcome thoughts that plague his mind.